You guys, this is going to be amazing. I had the wonderful chance of speaking with her this past week on my lunch break. Amanda, welcome. Please see the left hand side. There's like a mic button on the bottom. If you're using your phone, and you just click that mic button, and then that should request you to the space to speak. Perfect. Hi, Amanda. Are you with us? So you just click that same mic button and it unmutes you. And then you can speak. And then when you're done speaking, you just click the mute button again or the mic button and it mutes you. Can you hear me? Are you good? I'm not sure.
I can hear you, Sarah.
Oh, perfect. I can hear you too. Hello.
Wonderful. Hello. Hi.
Oh, welcome, Amanda. I'm so glad. I was just saying that I had the privilege to speak with you earlier this week. I think we got, I don't even know, maybe 35, 40 minutes in, and you already had me within the first 5 minutes. So thank you for being here and welcome. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm good. Apologies for having some technological difficulties.
Not a worry. That usually happens with X spaces. They can be quite annoying at times. I'm glad that we can hear each other because that's something else that usually happens. So, um, but yes, there's a couple of we made a little beat sheet to make sure that we get everything covered today. We're not on a time frame. So if everyone doesn't mind giving Amanda and I some time, we're going to go through everything. And then later on, I will bring up listeners from the audience, respectful listeners, to two at a time. And you guys can ask some questions, and then I'll drop you back down. So we'll sort of flow the space in that way. But Amanda, why don't you introduce yourself? Welcome. Welcome to the UFO community on X.
Yeah, thank you. I'm a complete newbie here, as you know, and I didn't even imagine that my experience had anything to do with the UFO community until a couple of years ago, when I heard about the story of Chris Bledsoe. Up until that point, I really just thought I'd had an experience. I think I said this to you on the phone, of some kind of deity, which for an ordinary person would be shocking enough. But because of my background in esotericism and having been a clairvoyant since I can remember, it wasn't really that surprising in a sense, even though the experience felt very stigmatizing. And it took me a number of years before I met other people in the south of France, where I was living at the time when I had this experience, who'd also encountered the lady. And one of the most significant of those people was the filmmaker Richard Stanley, who I connected with due to a job that I had in Paris at the time, working as an esoteric advisor for a web TV channel. And Richard was given to me to interview for the web TV channel, and our first conversation was about his encounters with the lady. And up until that point, I didn't know there was anybody else who'd had an experience of this being. And then that took me down a particular trajectory, which I'll explain more about later within the esoteric world. But it was only when a friend insisted that I listen to one of the videos that Chris Bledsoe did that I understood that we'd actually been in contact with the same being.
That's amazing. It's amazing because we, most of us are familiar with Chris Bledsoe, his story. Some people have actually met him and experienced the orbs with him. And then some people, he's come into our spaces with, I think, Science Bob and others. I think he's had been in here for a couple of times, so we've been able to ask him some questions. But where would you like to start? Would you like to start in the beginning, and then we'll work our way through?
You decide.
I think, yes, let's get to know you. Let's get to, I think, learning who you are and where you came from and why you got into the esoteric and occult line, and then, and how that fits in with your experiences with the lady as you, or maybe she comes later and it's other experiences in the beginning that brought you here.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, I come from a family in which the esoteric has been a part of our lives really for generations. My father was a spiritualist and a healer, as well as being an inventor and a businessman. And my mother came from um, a kind of Welsh Scandinavian family. So they had traditions that were passed down on both sides of the family. So when I started to have these experiences as a child, um, they weren't exactly encouraged, but they weren't discouraged either. And I think I was very fortunate to grow up in such an environment and to have those family traditions passed down. But even so, I remember my first experience that I can recall as a kind of clairvoyant experience was a guess of a time slip or a bleed through, and I used to get those a lot when I was a child. So we were visiting a castle in Wales, and I was 6 at the time, and we were coming down a staircase inside a tower room, and I saw blood all over the stairs. And as soon as I saw it, I became terrified and I ran out of the building, out of the castle, screaming and saying to my mom, "There's blood on the stairs." And I felt all the emotions of that person in the past all through my body, like it was happening in real time. But my mom, even though she, was aware of these things, she, being a typical mom, probably a bit frustrated, um, just said, "Oh, it's just your imagination." But then, as we went outside, we bumped into a woman who was leading a tour group there, and she'd overheard what happened, and she came up to my mom and said, "Well, actually, no, your daughter is right. Somebody was murdered there on those steps 700 years ago."
Oh my gosh. And how did you, what came of this? Like, did your mom sit you down? Did you want to learn more about the woman who was murdered? What was your, at 6, like, what was your thought process?
I just knew it was real. I knew that what I'd experienced in my body was a memory, but I didn't think it was my memory, like a past life memory. I knew that I had somehow communicated with the memory of the place. And that kind of thing happened quite a lot after that. I would go to places and know the history of what had happened there. I would feel it in my body and feel the emotions, especially if there had been some kind of trauma or a murder or a battle, something like that. And interestingly, I think in a way that prepared me for what came later when I went to live in Monsegur, where the Cathars had been massacred. And I think it was part of my clairvoyant healing work, in a sense, to understand the stories of these places, and somehow in our understanding of their stories, that story can be healed, it can be released in some way.
And also, it makes me think of, certain life experiences when you're younger prepare you for the ones that you're going to experience later. That might be even, more traumatic or um, more dramatic, even. So a lot of your experiences early on. I mean, I can't imagine. What was your next experience?
Well, the next one that I can remember of that kind, I was I was taking care of some animals for a friend. I was about 20 at the time, and she was away on holiday, and she lived in rural Wales in a big farmhouse. And um, I took one of the dogs out for a walk one evening, and as I was walking back, I could see and hear men fighting in the field right next to her house. It was a very isolated place. and I could hear the swords clashing against each other, and shouting. It was very eerie. It felt extremely real, and I thought maybe I'd stumbled upon a reenactment group, or someone doing something for a film. It was so real. I could see them and hear them, and then as I came closer to the field, they just disappeared. And I was really quite disturbed by that experience. And I called her up and told her what happened. And she said, "Oh, yeah, there was a famous battle there hundreds of years ago. And that's the reason why the field is called Macy Rudalt, which means blood on the hill or red hill."
And so, what did you? So, my thought process is, I've actually heard a story. I think it was probably on a podcast about there was a cabin in the woods, and two women came across them, and they were, you know, it was like 200 years ago or something, and then it was like a time, like there was something to do with time warping or something. Did you have any thought process of maybe fading into another um multiverse, or do you think that this was memory? And what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I felt as if everything was happening now. So even though this was a different time, it was still happening on some level, like in this other dimension of reality. It was still happening.
Wow, so just kind of like that idea that that there is no past and future, that everything is present, everything is happening now at the same time, always.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Wow. And how old were you when you had this experience?
I was 20 when I had that experience.
And then so what like what were your steps? You said you got into the esoteric and the occult, and I would love to know, like, so your experiences, I'm assuming, and you can please correct me, led you to your studies. Can you walk me through that?
Yeah, that's right. So I was raised as a Christian, like so many of us have been, and I felt that within that, um, there was something missing because I remembered recently that I think I had encounters with the lady when I was a child, but they weren't physicalized in the same way. But I remember this feminine presence that I would feel in my bedroom at night sometimes. Excuse me. And so even though I was raised as a Christian, I felt there was something missing within that religion because I was not raised as a Catholic. I was raised Church of England. And I became friends with a Catholic girl when I was a child, and I used to sneak off to the Catholic church with her to pray to the statues of Mary because we didn't have them in our church. And it was as if I could feel within this archetype or spiritual being, some kind of echo of the woman that I felt in my room at night. This beautiful, caring, compassionate, wise presence who also came with a fragrance. And I had no understanding of why I should feel that way. It was very, very strange for me, but I just continued to follow that. And so I rejected Christianity because after those experiences, I felt like it didn't encompass the truth of everything that I was perceiving as a clairvoyant. And I had many mystical experiences which didn't seem to fit as far as I understood Christianity at that time because my understanding was very limited. So when I was 22, I decided to go to university and study feminist theology because I had a mystical experience in a small chapel in Wales in which, again, I felt this feminine presence, this powerful, divine feminine presence in this tiny chapel in the middle of nowhere. And something came over me in which I had an understanding that there was a whole feminine side to Christianity that I felt had been left out. And I was very young at this time, and I had no idea whether this was real or not, but I was just following my instincts and my experiences. So I studied feminist theology because I then learned about the Christian mystics such as Julian of Norwich, Hildegard of Bingen, the different Saint Teresas, all of these women who'd had profound spiritual, and we could now say NHI experiences that I knew nothing about, that were completely excluded from my education. And I enjoyed that, but I also found there was something missing in that they were simply studying the experiences, but they had no beliefs. Nobody in my whole university had any spiritual beliefs. They were simply studying and talking about it almost philosophically or sociologically. And so I felt unsatisfied. And so I then started looking for other groups of people that I could get involved with where I could learn more about my own experiences. And so, like many people, I started looking in the New Age and different Buddhist groups, different mystical groups, witchcraft groups. I tried pretty much everything, but nothing was really, excuse me, nothing was really encompassing everything that I had experienced, the psychic experiences, the mystical experiences, precognition, retrocognition, all of these things. And so in the end, I ended up going back to university again to study transpersonal psychology. And it was through studying that I began to understand a lot more about myself and my own experiences, and also to hear about others outside of a religious framework who'd also had these types of experiences. And that's when I became interested in consciousness studies. And around that time, my dad, who was very clairvoyant, said to me, I think you should become a Gnostic bishop. This was completely out of the blue. We were just having a normal conversation and out it popped. And I was already friends at the time with Rosamond Miller from the Ecclesia Gnostica in America. And so I contacted Rosamond and asked her about how I could perhaps study with her to do this, because I already knew to listen to my dad's psychic intuitions because they'd been right many times before. But she said, oh, you'd have to come and live in America for, a certain amount of time. And at the time I couldn't do it. So I forgot all about it. And then through a dream, I met Iona Miller, who became one of my mentors. And Iona, through Iona, I then connected with a man in Texas, believe it or not, Dashiell Johnson, who then connected me with an esoteric group in Paris, who, upon meeting me, immediately said, okay, you're a member of the Bloodline, we want you to join our group. And from there, I then became a Gnostic bishop.
That's amazing, because I now have a few questions for you. I want to go back a little bit. You said that you had precognitive, like your father, you had some precognitive, I don't know if they were dreams or thoughts or just maybe seeing. And then if you could break down what it is to be an agnostic bishop. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, sure. So the precognitive things, that's run in my family for generations. My mother has it, my grandmother has it, I have it, my dad has it. But I think I'm the only one who's really developed it and spent time developing it and accepted it. And that was a decision that I made because it was happening so frequently to me that I realized that I could either embrace it or go through my life having to shut down all of my abilities, which I tried to do for a number of years, by the way. So when I embraced that, it started to happen more and more. And it was in dreams, and it was in visions, and it was in just a waking knowing, which I now call gnosis, a direct knowing about things to come. I'll give you an example. So I had a friend who came to visit, and as soon as she walked in, I knew she was pregnant immediately before she even said anything. And I also knew she was thinking about not having the baby before she said anything. And I immediately went up to her and told her information that was not coming from me about how she should not do what she was thinking of doing and all the reasons why. So, and it was very difficult because when you have that kind of knowledge and when it's about something so personal, the other person's free will comes into play as well. And so you can only give the information that you receive in good faith and know that that person will do with it what they will. And I did see unfortunate consequences for her if she took the course of action she was planning to take. And unfortunately, she did take that course of action, and those unpleasant things did happen to her. And so, the precognition, it can be very difficult because seeing those things about people that I care about, and it's not something that I choose to have happen. It's like an immediate incoming of information that needs to be communicated for a higher purpose. And when that happens, I simply have to say it. But equally, there are times when I don't say it because I just feel it wouldn't be appropriate.
Yes, that makes it's a lot of as you were talking, I just kept thinking it's a lot of power, a lot of responsibility. Do you let someone know this? Do you hold back? I don't imagine. I can't imagine what that feels like. Because it's like giving advice of future realities that could come to pass. Yeah. So, what can you explain what an agnostic bishop is and what one does, and what age you were at, and how this all kind of helped build where you are right now? Thank you.
Yeah. So a Gnostic bishop. So gnosis simply means direct understanding, direct knowing, direct perception. And when I was searching for, spiritual community, so to speak, or at least some knowledge of these experiences that I was having, a context for them, um, like I said, I couldn't find an umbrella that I could step under that would encompass everything that I'd experienced, and that also had a kind of ethical framework and its own teachings. And so the Gnostic church that I became a bishop of is actually based in France. And it was created in, I think it was originally 1880 by a man called Jules Doinel, who was a prominent esotericist and Freemason and Martinist occultist based in Paris. And he was going to the salon of an aristocratic woman called Lady Kate Ness, and they were doing a lot of early psychic research. They were having salons where groups of aristocrats and high level esotericists would get together and they would channel and they would do various exercises to enhance their abilities, and everything was documented. And so Jules Doinel, during one of these seances with Lady Kate Ness, received information from 13 Cathar bishops who presented themselves in the seance and said they wished him to recreate the Gnostic Cathar church and that now was the time. Now, what's interesting for me about this is that the information that Jules Donnell was given was that this was to be the age of the lady, that we are coming into the third age of Christianity, the first age being the age of the Father, which was represented by the Old Testament and Jehovah, to the age of the Son, which is represented by the New Testament and Christ, to the age of the Holy Spirit, the Divine Mother Mary, which they say either the Holy Book hasn't been written or it was the Nag Hammadi. So Jules Darnell, he was working as an archivist in a library. He had access to private archives, and so he then was able to look for the names of these 13 Cathar bishops, and they all were in the archives. They were real. And so when he realized that this was genuine spirit contact, he decided to take the baton, under which he then created the French Gnostic Church. And so that was that was one aspect of it, and then other lineages came together at the same kind of time. And what I also find interesting about this is that this was also around the time of the apparitions of Mary. So this element of the divine feminine was rising up, it was bubbling up in France at that time, and it was reaching out to different people, because Jules Darnell and Lady Caithness were not the only ones who were receiving similar information.
You have me thinking about all of these questions with Mary, and you even brought up the bloodline. I don't want to go into that yet because I think that that's a whole nother chapter, but I want to understand where you are in your timeline. Have you at this point, and I'm assuming you're in your mid 20s?
No, I'm not. I'm 40.
Oh, you were 14.
Sorry, in my mid 20s.
Oh, when
Yeah,
you
at
were
the time
joining,
when this happened.
when you became a bishop.
No, I was how old?
Oh,
34? I
34.
was 34.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Now I want to go back into your life timeline, if you don't mind. I don't, unless there,
Yeah.
now previous to this, now learning all of this, had you had any experiences with the lady previous to this?
Um, previous to my consecration as a Gnostic bishop, or previous to the first experience that I had?
Previous to you becoming a bishop.
It's an interesting question, because my first encounter with her, physical encounter with her, happened 3 months after my consecration.
Amazing. Wow. Okay. Do you want to then go into that? Does that seem to feel right? Like if we went into that? Okay.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, so my first encounter with the lady, physicalized encounter with the lady, happened on April the 22nd, and it was 2016. And I was on a pilgrimage, as part of a global pilgrimage for different people praying in different sacred sites around the world for the same group of people. I'd been participating in this for a number of years. It was organized by a friend of mine called Raylene Abbott. And so there were, on that day, 12 women going to 12 different sacred sites praying for the same 200 people. And we'd done this before, and miracles happened. Like, people got healed, problems they were having disappeared. I know it had been very successful. And on this particular occasion, my partner at the time suggested that I go to pray for these people at the site of a Black Madonna in Orcival, which is in the Auvergne region of France. And so I pilgrimaged there, and it was a volcanic region, and the basilica in which this statue was housed was made from volcanic rock. And I think this is significant as well in the kind of geological aspect of where some of these apparitions, or rather visitations, happen. So when I arrived in Orcival, I went to the basilica, and it was extremely busy, so I couldn't pray there and then because there were too many people. But I knew that it stayed open all night because it was what they call a shrine, and so it stayed open all night long. So I took a room in the hotel directly opposite the basilica. I could see the front door from my window. And around midnight, I went back into the basilica and prayed at the foot of the statue. And just like in Shaft, this particular Black Madonna has been whitewashed. She's been painted white, which I found rather disturbing. And she was also put inside a perspex box and protected by lasers. So I couldn't get very close to her, but nonetheless, I felt this power when I was praying there for these people. And I also noticed that through the center of the basilica, beginning on the back wall, there was a spring, a sacred spring running through the center. And I could feel that that spring had a power also. And it ran directly through the center of the basilica up into the altar near the statue. So after I had been praying to her, I went back to my hotel room and went to bed. And at 3 a.m., I awoke from a dream of an incredibly bright white light that was so bright that it woke me up. And I sat up and I saw that this light was still in the room beside me to the right side of the bed. And then it crossed the room like an orb, I now know, but at that time I didn't know about orbs. I knew nothing about this. And so it crossed from the right side to the left, and then on the left side, as I watched, it formed into the shape of a lady, and she was hovering about 2 or 3 feet above the ground, and I would say she was about 7 or 8 feet tall, and she was solid. And this was really the terrifying thing, because I'd seen many, many things in my lifetime by that point, but I had never ever seen a being coalesce out of light and then solidify like this before. And she was cloaked, so I couldn't see her face. She was either veiled or cloaked, but I could see the outline of the cloak. I couldn't see her face. And then where her heart would be was a bright red, scintillating, spinning light, which I found very strange. And then I was really scared, obviously, and I could feel the adrenaline rushing through my body, and I was absolutely awake. There was no question of that. And then she spoke, and she said, "You called me, so what do you want?" And oh no, sorry. The first thing she said was, "People think they come here to see the Black Madonna, but this is what I really look like. You called me, so what do you want?" And I was just staring at this being and in awe, and I couldn't formulate a sentence because I didn't know what was happening to me. I was completely bewildered and stunned and in awe, and I couldn't think about anything at all. And so she scanned me, and she extended a filament of light from the center of her body and then scanned up and down through the center of my body. And I would say for about 3 hours. And I wasn't paralyzed, but I had no intention or desire to move. I just didn't want to. I was in the moment, and it was as if something was transferring between the two of us, that she was transferring something to me as well as reading me. She was receiving information and also transferring something to me. And at the end of, I would say, the 3 hours, dawn was approaching. So that's how come I know it was about 3 hours, because I know it was 3 a.m. when I woke up. And she said, "What you want is the truth, and the truth you shall have. And if you want to know the truth of your boyfriend, look at his phone." So immediately this snapped me out of my reverie that I was in, and I sat up bolt upright and said no. And then this broke the contact, and she then embodied, so in this physical embodied form, floated backwards and then floated to the right and out of the window as I watched. So she floated out of the window and then she dematerialized. And the next day, when my boyfriend at the time came to collect me, having dropped me there, I told him what had happened and asked him why she would say this. Now, the thing is, being clairvoyant, I already knew. I already knew that he was still in contact with his ex-partner, despite telling me that he was not. And so he finally confessed, and I just said, well, I already knew. And but I was still not very happy about it. And as we were about to leave Orsabal and drive back home, I asked if I could stop in a little shop opposite the basilica. So on the other side of the basilica, from my hotel room, directly in the same line, was a small shop that was selling knives, and I wanted to purchase a knife. And so I went into the shop and casually asked the man behind the counter, who was a guy of about 35 years old, if he knew of anyone who'd ever had any strange experiences at Ursabal before. And I never mentioned my experience at all. And he immediately said, yes, me. And he went on to describe how a year ago, almost to the day, and again, this is significant because of the timing of these things, he had decided he was going to take his life because his wife had left and taken the children with her. And that day, he'd gone to pray at the foot of the Madonna in the basilica, just like I had. And then that night, he went back to his room, which was above his shop. So his room was also opposite the basilica in exact alignment with my hotel, with the basilica in the center. And that night at 3 a.m., he woke up to a bright white light that he thought was coming from outside. And he sprang out of bed, looked out at the window, and there was nothing out there. So he realized it was in the room, and terrified, he climbed back into bed and again watched as this light took the shape of a woman, and then formed into the shape of a cloaked woman, and then told him not to do what he was planning to do and all the reasons why he must not do it. And he was crying while he was telling me this story, and he said ever since then, um, his life had changed so much for the better. He used to be very nervous all the time. He was very psychic as well, but he'd repressed it because he didn't want to be. And he said, I'm not afraid of anything now because I know the lady is with me. So not only did I have this experience, which was shocking enough by itself, but I had confirmation from somebody else who'd had an almost identical experience almost at the same time a year before. And I had that confirmation within hours of having had this experience.
Can I ask you, before we move on? So, this man that had this experience with the lady was obviously going through some traumatic, life experiences. And we know that Chris Bledsoe, at the time when he saw the lady, was too going through these life traumatic experiences. Before you saw the lady, what was it that if you don't mind sharing, and if if I'm overstepping, please let me know. But what was it that you think quite possibly might have brought her to you?
That is such a good question. Um, like I said, I think she'd been with me since childhood, protecting me for some purpose, but I didn't realize that it was her until she physically embodied in this location. And I think at that time as well, I had veered, even though I'd just been consecrated as a bishop, I'd veered somewhat off of my spiritual path, in that I was kind of focusing on the more worldly aspects of it, like, okay, now I have to do this, now I have to do that, all the kind of administrative aspects of it, and not so much on the deeper mystical spiritual aspects that drew me into that in the first place. Um, and at the time, I wasn't going through anything traumatic. Um, in 3 years before that, I just ended a long-term relationship that I found quite traumatic, and that did open up my spiritual and psychic abilities hugely because I'd been suppressing them during that period of time. And during that time when I had that trauma, that was when I started to have so many precognitive dreams, like the dream that led me to Nicholas DeVere and the Dragon Court, the dream that led me to Iona Miller, and then, you know, again, more and more involved in the Dragon Court. And yeah, so I do think that trauma, it can bring these experiences to us. But I think the way that it does that is that it bypasses our ego. It bypasses our rationality and our belief that we're in control and that we have all the answers and we can do it all on our own. And that, you know, even though I know this is real, I could even, you know, make excuses to myself and say, oh, well, maybe it wasn't quite like that, and maybe it didn't really happen quite like that, so I could feel more comfortable with the reality. And I think this encounter with the lady, it tore that absolutely away from me. And like I said, initially I felt stigmatized. I felt like the experience itself was traumatic in a way, because I had nobody to talk to about it apart from that one man. But he wasn't traumatized because he thought he'd experienced Mary, but I didn't feel like I'd experienced Mary as such. I felt like she was a much older, bigger being, that was something hugely transpersonal and that had been with us since the beginning of time almost.
Wow, that is. I have so many questions. Before we move forward, I just wanted to ask, what is the Black Madonna, and why do you think she said everyone comes here to see the Black Madonna, but this is really who I am?
Great question. Okay, so do you mind if I backtrack a little? Because my encounter with the Black Madonna started before I saw what we call the White Lady.
Oh, I don't mind at all, please.
Okay, so in 2013, not long after I'd ended this very important long relationship, um, I had a period where I was feeling quite unwell and the doctors couldn't find anything wrong. And so I went to see another doctor who said, come on, you've just come out of a long term relationship. So can you just go home and stay with your parents and just eat and sleep and rest for a month and then you'll be fine? So I asked my parents and they said that's okay. And that's what I did. And while I was there, I had this it wasn't a dream. I was in bed, and this was in 2013, so 3 years before this encounter with the lady. Again, a ball of light appeared in my bedroom and said, a voice, a female voice, said, allow the radiant, coherent, healing light to enter your body and you shall be healed. And at the time, I didn't know what on earth this was, and I was a little bit trepidatious, thinking, what on earth is this? But I thought, well, what have I got to lose? So I allowed it to enter my body, and it was a very beautiful experience. But then I fell asleep and I don't remember anything more about it. And then the following day, though, when I got up, I was healed. Like all the symptoms that I'd had were completely gone. And so I went to Google and looked up the words radiant, coherent, healing light. And when I did that, I found a video made by a woman called Iona Miller, who was, well, she would call herself an amateur quantum physicist, I guess. She was also an artist and she was a profound and prolific researcher. And she used to work for the CIA also. So she was a woman who was an absolute powerhouse. And I watched her video and it was pretty much exactly what I had experienced. And it was talking about photons and how we as humans are photonic beings. And I just found her email, messaged her and said, I know this is going to sound really strange, but I had this encounter in the night last night and this is what happened. And I found your video and it's like, what happened? And immediately, as soon as I messaged her, her response was, well, if you found me through a visitation or a dream, then you must be a member of the bloodline then. And I denied knowing what she meant. And then she immediately started psychically telling me about my ancestry, things that she couldn't possibly know. And so I had to then give her credence, and we became extremely close friends. And then she became one of my mentors when I was doing my transpersonal psychology degree. And then at that same time, I started working as a clairvoyant professionally again, which I had done previously. And a man came to me from Paris who had an encounter with a black goddess, is the way he described it. And he was very scared about this. And I don't know how he found me, but he came and had this reading with me about this being that he'd encountered. He just wanted to know if she was evil and if it was a bad thing. But from my reading, it wasn't a bad thing. What actually happened to him is that this black skinned, and when I say black, I'm talking here pitch black, woman appeared in his house, and he had a 2 week long Kundalini experience where he couldn't actually get off his sofa. And not only that, but towards the 2 week end, he began to grow breasts and lactate. And so he was very, very disturbed by this experience. And he came to me to help him understand what had happened. And of course, I had no context for this either, but I just read into what I could see and reassured him that it was more like an initiatory experience and a positive visitation, which is how I could see it. Lots more things happened during that reading that were relevant to things that happened later, but for now, the important thing is to say that a few days later, I think I had a positive hitchhiker effect, because I was simply in my room and this black goddess appeared to me. And now I would call it, I suppose, an abduction experience. But at the time, then I had no context for this. And I simply said that she took me up. And so she took me up. And when I say took me up, she took me up into another dimensional reality and showed me things about life, death, reincarnation, wormholes, portals, black holes, gravity, subatomic particles, things that I had no knowledge of. And the cycle of reincarnation, how we die, where we go when we die, how to pass through the wormhole when we die and keep our consciousness intact, how subatomic particles are related to all of this and how they're related to gravity, all kinds of things. And yeah, it was a very, very profound experience. And
May I?
it,
Okay,
yeah, sure.
thank you. Sorry, Amanda. This is amazing. I have so a couple of questions before we move from this period. My question is, were you awake during this time like you were when you say, I know when I met the lady the first time, I was absolutely awake. Were you awake during this time, or was it just your like your body that traversed? Was it your physical body, sorry, that traversed into the next dimension, or your conscious self? And then are you able to break down what you learned when you did this?
Absolutely. I was awake. It was around about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I'd just been sitting in my room reading. And I was absolutely awake, 100% conscious. Um, and it was as if I had no body. So my physical body merged with hers, and I was taken up in this. It was like I knew I was above this dimension, and I can't even say I was above this planet, because it almost seemed like this planet had no density, no materiality behind it in this realm in which I was taken up to. And it was as if I was shown that this dimension, which is her realm, encompasses this planet. It was like a cosmic womb, and I know that sounds really obvious, but it is how it was. So I was 100% awake and conscious, and it was as if my body disappeared and my consciousness was all that I was. And I was taken up to this other dimension that was encompassing this reality that our reality lives inside of this dimension. It's almost like a sphere around our reality. And it was an ecstatic experience. It felt very loving, very compassionate, and very powerful at the same time.
And when you talk about that she taught you um, how we, you said something about how we're made of photons and how that is important and how to traverse the wormhole from life into death and reincarnation. Can you kind of maybe break that down?
Yeah, this was one of the most important things that I learned, and that seemed to be the most important teaching that she wanted to pass through to me. Basically, she showed me that when we die, it's like a reversal of when we are born. So when we are born, we come out of our mother, out of the portal of our mother, out of the womb and the vagina, into this reality. And then when we die, it's like we're sucked up through the metaphysical version of the same thing into a cosmic womb. And then when we go back into that cosmic womb, which is her domain, we enter into, well, it's really hard to explain, but I was shown like honeycomb type structures in this black void, and that the void is not empty at all. It's absolutely full of dark matter and subatomic particles, as well as photons. There was light in this black void as well. And the light was being represented as the masculine principle. So the blackness, her domain, this cosmic womb, was the feminine, the divine feminine, the kind of basic creation, the point from where we all come and to whom we all return. And it was as if I was glimpsing eternity and being shown how this operates. And that when we die, we go back to this place, and all of our information goes back into a little pocket in this kind of honeycomb structure. And every life that we have is stacked one on top of the other inside the exact same location. So nothing is ever lost, which I thought was really beautiful. And at the same time, she showed me that reincarnation is a choice, that we are not punished. And on the outside of this circle that I was looking down upon, I could see the lights popping in and out of this void. And she said they are lives popping in and out of existence. And so it was instantaneous, like how life and conception was happening, and then death was also happening. And it was like watching an eternal return. And on the outside of this circle were sparks of light going down. They were the ones that were being reborn, and then they were coming back up, coming back into this dimension. And then the ones that were popping in and out, they were the ones that had got off the cycle, so to speak, and they'd chosen that they could just pop in and out whenever they wanted. So there was an element of choice which I didn't expect to see when I had this experience at all. And I had no knowledge of reincarnation or any of these things at this time. And so, yeah, I saw that we are eternal beings, and that when we die, we go back to the same place from where we came before we entered here, and that dimension is right next to ours. And in a sense, she's always there. She's always there. And the subatomic particles, that was something to do with gravity and the wormholes, but I haven't fully understood that yet. And part of the way in which we are now having this conversation is because I made contact with Jack Sarfati, and I've been talking a little bit with him about this, and with another friend of mine who's a quantum physicist. So I'm trying to understand this further. But for me, it was something, the most important thing was this idea of maintaining a state of coherence when we pass through death. And the way that we do that is by making our own light coherent while we are still alive. And there are practices that we can utilize to do that. And we have to maintain a state of coherence. And it's only through that that we can then pass through what they call the second death and keep our consciousness so that when we do come back, we can have memories of why we're here.
I have to tell you, I have visualized the entire thing in my mind's eye, and I am this is amazing. I can't tell you how happy I am to have you here. So, thank you very much. Thank you for sharing all of this and answering my questions. I know we have a lot to cover, but I just wanted to pause and thank you, because that was really a beautiful visual. Um, because I've never experienced anything like that. So thank you. Um, I do want to say, Jay, just I do see you requesting, but at this moment, I am only going to be. It's only going to be Amanda and I. We're going to get through everything that she wants to get through, and then I will absolutely bring you up for questioning. Amanda, how are you doing? We're an hour in. Did you need a break? Are you okay?
I'm good if you are.
Oh, I'm fantastic. I feel like uh, I just feel very I don't even know how to explain it, but listening to you speak is very it's beautiful, and I appreciate your sharing everything. Thank you. Um, so
Thank you.
what I'm
Can I
oh
just say something there? The reason I went into all of that is because it explains my understanding of the Black Madonna. When I had this experience, I had no context or understanding for it. And so I was looking everywhere to try and understand, well, who is this being? What did I just see? And I looked at Kali, I looked at Shakti, I looked at Shekinah, all of these kind of dark goddesses who seem to have cosmic origins or origin stories. And they all seem to have elements of what I'd experienced, but it didn't seem to incorporate the whole. Apart from Shakti, I think Shakti was closest to what I'd seen. And so when I went to France a few years, well, actually, it was the same year, later the same year, and I became aware of the cult of the Black Madonna in France. Um, that to me, it has a transpersonal element because what I experienced, it was very transpersonal. It wasn't like a personal deity with a face and a name like the lady. The white lady or the shining lady, she also is only known as the lady to me. And so the closest representation to what I had experienced in 2013 was the Black Madonna. And then when I moved to Montsegur in 2017, when I met Richard, the first gift that Richard gave to me was a pair of meteorites, black meteorites, that are only found in Montsegur. And when you rub them together, they bleed, and they're considered to be connected to the Holy Grail and the stone that fell from Lucifer's crown because they're meteorites. And they have special healing powers. And Richard told me that the original Black Madonna, the statue that I'd been praying to, and I had my encounter with the White Lady, was a meteorite that came from Pessinus. And it was then taken from Pessinus to Rome on the instructions of the oracles when Rome was besieged by Hannibal. And at the time, the meteorite was only allowed to be touched by women. Only women were allowed to touch this stone. And so it was passed from woman to woman to woman until it got to the boat. Then it was passed to a man, but the man in the boat was dressed as a woman. And then when it was taken to Rome, it was passed again to a woman. And now it's under the Vatican, the original black stone, so I've been told.
wow. And what um can you explain, like, okay, so I don't know if maybe you explained this and it just went over my head. I apologize. But when the lady came to you and said, everyone comes here to see the Black Madonna, but this is who I really am. What is the Black Madonna?
Yeah, so for me, and this is something that's only come to me recently, through speaking with a friend of mine, Chester. We were having a conversation about this recently, and I realized, excuse me, when I moved to the south of France, to Montségur, when I met Richard, he told me, because he also had an encounter with the Black Goddess, or the Black Madonna, before his White Lady experience. And he told me that the tradition says, first you get the Black Madonna, then you get the White Lady. And it's like they're two sides of the same kind of divine feminine in a different way. And so my understanding now is that what came through the meteorite is this spirit, this being, this deity, which is actually the lady.
Like it cracked the meteorite. Maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm trying to follow. Okay. Wow.
Yeah, I think it's even deeper than that. I think that there's a kind of information stream that is connected to these meteorites, which brings a specific type of, I don't know, being or consciousness with it when they come here, when they land here.
Wow. Okay. So where I'm wondering where you want to take this, because there's a couple of things that you did bring up, but I don't want to lose sight of your entire story. You brought up the bloodlines, which I know we absolutely will get into, the Holy Grail, all of that. Of course, the Vatican. I can't wait to peel that back. But do you want to move on through the 13 experiences and move on to your second experience with the lady? How does that work?
Yeah, that's great. So I had this feeling, like I said, of being stigmatized by my initial encounter because I had nobody that I could speak to about it who could possibly understand. And then when I met Richard Stanley, his first communication with me, as I said, was about his own experience, which happened 10 years previously when he first went to Montségur, where he was filming a documentary for the BBC about Otto Rahn. And so he had his encounter, and it was so profound that he then left his job in London and moved to Montségur immediately and pledged himself and his life to the lady and to the castle. And then he became an expert in the history of the Cathars and a kind of guardian, I suppose, of the place. And so when we first began talking and he told me about his experience, he had a witness as well, his partner at the time. They were both on the top of the mountain inside the castle, and in the north tower, they saw a woman and they heard her feet like crunching along the stones on the ground. And he said she was glowing, and initially he thought, and she was solid as well. And initially he thought that she was a woman who was perhaps doing some kind of cosplay and had some luminous paint on her or something. And then as they got closer, though, they saw the way she was looking at them, and he realized that was not a human woman, like by any stretch of the imagination. And he said he just fell to his knees. He fell to his knees and he cried and he cried and he cried, and he felt that he had been blessed and simultaneously forgiven. And he said in that moment he felt this memory, like this feeling of remembrance, that he knew this being, he knew this woman. And in that moment she just again dematerialized, and as she was dematerializing, passed through the castle wall. And as with my experience, he knew it was no mere ghost, it was something else, and his partner at the time also knew that, and she had her own profound experience. So when he told me about that and he invited me to go to Montségur, I knew I had to go, even though I was living in Paris at that time. And so I went to meet with him, and within a few weeks, we struck up a relationship, and I moved in with him. And within a few weeks of me being there, I had my first encounter with the lady there in Montségur. And I've since had, I think, 9 were there on the mountain, and then the rest were in the UK. So the first one, I was just sitting at the window in our house, because our house overlooked the back of the mountain, and she appeared in the mountain, and she was huge. I mean, she must have been about 80 feet tall this time, and she had a gigantic conical headdress on and a long gown, like a bandage gown. I can't describe it, but I've since seen similar uh, gowns worn by some of the people in the drawings from Egypt, some of the women. And so this tight conical kind of hat, and then this bandage dress almost. And she had her hand held out in a very particular um, position, like a position of benediction. And she had two male figures on either side of her. And I was not sure whether they were positive or negative. I couldn't really tell whether they were protectors or whether they were somehow holding her back. I couldn't really tell, but something about it made me feel uncomfortable. And she just stood there and held her hand out, staring at me. And again, the face, this time around, I could see her eyes, but she was so far off in the distance that I wasn't scorched, because what I understood later is that she didn't want to show her face to me because I would be affected negatively. I would be scorched, in the way she put it. So this time round, she was far enough away not to scorch me. And I just fell to the ground. I just fell to the ground, and I was overcome by this experience. Again, something transmitted from her to me. And later on that day, I was telling Richard about what happened, and she then kind of came into me and started speaking through me, and my hand was the whole time during the conversation held in the exact same position that she was holding it when I saw her, when I was speaking with Richard. So that was the second experience, and that was quite intense. I was giving him information for about 2 hours, and then eventually she just stepped away. And that was, again, a very, very bizarre experience.
Yes, I wanted to. Are you okay sharing what you passed when she came into your body, like the information that she passed to Richard?
Yeah, I can't remember it, but he wrote it all down.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Because you, was it that your consciousness wasn't there? That
Yeah.
it was okay, okay. And do you? So you, it was as if maybe you were sleeping.
I was not sleeping, I was awake, and I knew I was conscious, but I also knew that she had taken over my ability to speak.
And do you remember maybe, um, the idea of what she passed on that Richard wrote down?
Yeah, she was speaking about the Cathars. She was speaking about the necessity of healing. She was speaking about the necessity of blessing the land. She was speaking about the necessity of letting go of the anger and the hate because of what had happened there, the persecution of the Cathars, and the way in which they were burned for heresy after a long period of time. I mean, 1 million Cathars died at least. 300 died in Montsegur in 1244, but there were many more that died during the Albigensian Crusade, and she was speaking about that.
And what do you think now, looking back on this and the Cathars? What do you think the significance is? Like, I understand that she's saying, like, we need to bless this land, we need, because this was very important. There were so many that passed away. But what do you think, like, maybe the higher significance of this? What meaning is there?
Yeah. Well, that brings me to one of my other encounters with her, and this one is one of the most important ones, because she came into my body fully in this particular encounter, and uh this was March 16th, 2019. Richard and myself and our friend Josephine had just driven back from filming Colour Out of Space in Portugal, and we decided we were going to stop off at the celebrations in the mountain for the Cathars. Every March 16th, there's a celebration where we read out all the names of the people who died, and we sing and we pray for them and everything else. And so we drove back from Portugal and then went straight there, had the celebration, and then everybody left, and I was alone sitting in the mountain, and she came up behind me, and I could feel her behind me, and then she said, "If you would look upon my face and live, you must purify your heart of any negativity, self-doubt, anger, fear, hatred, and desire for revenge." And when she was saying this to me, I was thinking, but I don't have those things. I don't have desire for revenge. But we've been talking about the Cathars and definitely feeling like it was a very unjust situation that happened there. And so I was kind of in denial. And then this huge column of energy came up from underneath the mountain, and that mountain is a very powerful place. It was sacred for a reason, and this column of energy came up and started washing through my body, upwards, 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 through my entire body. And as it did, it was touching parts of my body that had all of these negative emotions trapped in, and I could feel this energy like touching them and making me aware that they were there when I hadn't known that they were there, and then washing them away. And this happened for a matter of a few minutes, and at the end of it, I felt completely purified and empty. But when I say empty, I mean in a very harmonious way. And there was this feeling of divine neutrality, like everything was somehow okay. Even the terrible things, somehow it was all okay, that I couldn't explain. And from that place, she was then able to enter my body. And so she walked up behind me and then merged with me. And it wasn't a state of possession, it was a state of merging in which we became one being, one consciousness. And when that happened, it was profound. And I saw the world through her eyes, and this feeling of divine neutrality, but ultimate absolute compassion and love for humanity and for the whole world and for all of us, every single aspect of creation, and this kind of acceptance of reality as it is and how we all suffer here. And at the same time, we experience so much beauty and wonder and love and paradox that they don't have there. They don't have the paradox somehow. And at the same time, she was showing me how much love she has for all of us, all of humanity, and the compassion that she has for all of us. And I felt it through my whole body. I felt all of her being, her consciousness, how she witnesses us, and also her intention, which is to help us to know that we're not alone, that even though it seems like we are bound here in this hard, heavy, dense reality, we're not alone, and she is here to help us, and miracles do happen, and these beings are here to intervene, and they do, and they can. But we have to be willing to do the work, and that means, in this instance for me, it was letting go of those negative emotions. And that's a difficult thing to do, because we believe we have reason to keep hold of all those negative emotions because they are the things that will protect us. But what she showed me in that moment is that actually, from the higher vantage point where she sees things, we don't need those negative emotions, because there's something else that we can tune into that keeps us safer than anything else we could imagine.
Um, Honestly, your story it's profound, and it, I can't explain it. Like, while I'm sitting here listening to you, and I don't know how to explain this. Like, I feel like I just smoked marijuana, and I'm extremely high, if that makes any sense. But I have not smoked anything. I'm completely sober. I've only had coffee today, but I just feel like in my head as I'm listening and picturing and calmness, I just sense of just what being here, and listening to you, and listening to you share this, and I really appreciate that. Thank you. um
Thank you too. I really appreciate you sharing that because that is what she feels like. I'm so glad you can feel that as well through me.
oh, yeah, I can I definitely can tell it's in my eyes, because it's always like there's like, yeah, I don't know how to explain it, but I definitely feel this. Yeah, and I'm with you, and so I'm not sure if you want to move to the next lady experience, or which way you want it. Like, where are you feeling your telling of your story going?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind. I mean, I think right now maybe we can talk again about all of the 13 experiences that I've had, but I wouldn't mind sharing another two with you, just because I know we've got a lot to get through, haven't we?
Oh yes, we do, but at your own pace. At your own pace.
Okay. Yeah. So that was really one of the most profound experiences with the lady that I had, apart from my first one, because she became part of me, and I became part of her. And in that moment, the way the contact was broken, and I think this is important to share, is that I had a moment of fear and doubt because I was in this place with her, looking at these realities, and she was part of me and I was part of her, and suddenly I a little tiny logical part of my mind kicked in, and fear said, oh my god, you're being possessed, you're losing yourself, you're being possessed, and in that moment, as soon as I had that moment of fear, boom, the connection was gone, and she walked out backwards from my body, and she walked backwards into the woods. um, and I didn't feel bereft. I didn't feel like I'd done anything wrong, but I was immediately aware of how just the tiniest negative thought and negative feeling in me broke the contact. And again, that almost reinforces what she'd shown me when she said, if you would look upon my face and live, you must purify yourself from all of these things. Um, and so in that moment when that happened, I carried that with me. When I went down the mountain and I spoke with other people about what had happened. And I think these different experiences, they're cumulative, and the more contact that I have with her, the more it's almost like she becomes a part of me, or I become a part of her. It's hard to explain. Um, but when I left France and came back to the UK, it was because my father was very unwell and we didn't know if he was going to make it. And I had to make a choice because we still had COVID restrictions about whether I would risk staying in the UK and him dying without me seeing him, or if I would go back to the UK, having been living in France for 10 years at that time. So I came back to the UK, and my dad was very ill, and I was in Glastonbury at the time, and he was in the north of England. And I didn't think I was going to get to see him before he passed because he was very, very ill. And I went back home to stay with my mum. And that night when I arrived, I was sure he was going to die. And I spoke to a friend of mine, a woman called Jo Hickey Hall, who does the podcast that you watched, Sarah, the Modern Fairy podcast. And she said to me, Amanda, remember who you are, because I was inconsolable. I couldn't stop crying. I was convinced he was about to die. And she said, remember who you are, and remember who you're in contact with, and remember what you can do. And she said, go to him, enter his reality, and help him. If he needs to cross, help him. And if he doesn't need to cross, ask the lady for help. And so, excuse me, I did that night at 2 o'clock in the morning. I was crying and praying to the lady and inconsolable, like Chris Bledsoe was actually. And she appeared in the corner of my bedroom, fully physically embodied. And then 9 light beings came out of her body that looked masculine to me. And they surrounded me, and I could see my dad, and I could see him in his hospital bed. And then I saw him in the underworld, is the only way I can describe it. And he was walking through the underworld, moving his arms as if he was, because for a few days he'd been moving his arms in a very strange way in the hospital. Like he was moving things away from in front of his face. And I didn't know this at the time, but my mum told me because she was at the hospital. And he was moving tree roots from in front of his face as he was walking through the underworld underneath these trees. And then these 9 light beings, I saw them go to him and lift him out of the underworld. And that was at 2 a.m. And I just was exhausted and I was crying and I fell asleep. And then the next morning, I went to the hospital and I was outside my dad's room crying. And my mum was inside, but I couldn't get myself together emotionally at that point to go in at that moment. And my mum was inside, but I couldn't see my mum or my dad. And then a nurse came out and said to me, "Why are you crying? Your father's going to be okay. His fever broke in the middle of the night. He'd had sepsis, and they tried every antibiotic, and none of them were working." And yeah, she said it was a miracle. And so I went in, and my mum said that at 2 a.m., he'd suddenly start moving his arms, and this peace came over him. And after that, we had, I think it was 7 more weeks with him, and then he passed peacefully.
That's a beautiful story. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. I've heard of movements of people that are on, like, that are the very similar, but are on their deathbed. An uncle of mine, very close. Yes. Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, so that was a very profound one. And then the other experience that I had, one of the others, excuse me, was the one that brought me here to Glastonbury. Before my dad passed away, a friend that I hadn't been in contact with for 13 years contacted me and said she was living in Glastonbury and asked if I wanted to come and visit. So, as I didn't expect to be staying in the UK, I agreed and came to visit her. This is going back now almost 2 years ago, I think. And we were having a good time in Glastonbury. I didn't expect anything to come of it. I was quite kind of judgmental about what I imagined Glastonbury to be. I thought it was going to be a bit of a spiritual supermarket and not very serious because I'd never been before to Glastonbury. And I had my ego smashed when I went into the White Spring with this friend of mine who's called Kate. And the White Spring is an old Victorian well house that has been built around a sacred spring that has been here for thousands of years and is very pure, and it's drinkable and it flows perpetually. And it's one of the reasons why Glastonbury became a spiritual centre before Christianity. And so I went into this well house, and it's kept completely dark. They have no electricity in there. It's all lit with candlelight. They have incense burning perpetually. And they have 3 interlinking bathing pools. And when I walked down the steps, I felt like I'd been transported into another reality, like I could have been anywhere at any time in history. And there was a man in the central pool, naked, praying, just perambulating through the central pool. And the incense in the air and the candlelight and the atmosphere of sanctity, it was so beautiful. And my heart just opened, and I felt all the energy that I used to feel in France when I was making pilgrimages, even more so in this place. And then Kate took me by the hand and we walked into the far left corner, and there we were both in trance. I can only say we were both in trance. I don't know what happened to us, but we were both in trance when we walked in. There in the far left corner was the statue of the Black Madonna, and I looked at the statue of the Black Madonna, and through the wall appeared the White Lady. And I was so shocked and so happy, because I thought previously, this was before my encounter that happened that saved my dad. I thought previously the lady was bound to the earth in France, that she was part of the landscape there and could only manifest in France or in Portugal, perhaps. I didn't know that she could manifest here in the UK. And so when I saw her come through the wall, I was just overjoyed. And Kate couldn't see her, but she could feel everything that I felt. And both of us fell to the ground, and I was crying, she was crying. It was overawing. It was just profound. And I got up and I said to Kate, right, that's it. If I stay in England, I have to be here. Now I know why I'm here. I couldn't have imagined that the lady could manifest anywhere else. I didn't know about Chris Bledsoe at that time. I only knew about the apparitions of Mary and what I'd experienced and what Richard had experienced and the man from Ulsterbell. So to see her here, it was just wonderful. And so that is how I came to Glastonbury.
Wow. And what year was this? 20
Yeah, this was 2 years
Oh
ago.
wow. Okay. And you have yet to meet with Chris Bledsoe. So then I would
Yeah.
ask, what at this point are you feeling, learning? What is your knowledge about everything? What are you feeling confident in? What are the growing questions, and what is the pathway from 2 years ago to today that you kind of adventured on, and the people that you've met?
Yeah, so it was really when I came back to the UK, I met an old friend I hadn't seen in many years, and this was before I knew about Chris Bledsoe. And please forgive me, UFO community, because I was very judgmental about UFOs, despite all my own experiences. I was scared. I was just scared, and I didn't want to imagine, the implications of all of this. When it was a kind of non-physical being that could occasionally take physical form, that was okay. But the idea of it being more than that, I wasn't prepared. And so this friend that I bumped into insisted that I watch one of Chris's videos, and I refused, because when I met this friend again, another friend said to me, "Oh, be careful of him. He's into UFOs." And I thought, "Oh no, not one of those people." And yeah, I'm embarrassed to say that now, but anyway, it's how it was. And so he kept being persistent. And then another friend of mine, Chris, who has been a great ally and supporter in my work and in my journey, he also suggested that I look at Chris Bledsoe's work. And so in the end, I relented and I watched his video. And as soon as I watched this particular video, when he speaks about the lady, I contacted him immediately and told him about my experiences. And he confirmed that we had been in contact with the same being. And then when I read the transcript of his experiences under hypnosis, when he referred to her as Hathor and also as the lady, I became even more convinced that we had experienced the same being, because I don't know if any of you have read the original transcripts of his hypnotherapy session that he had, but that feeling of compassion and love and just overwhelming sadness and love for all of us was in his experience as well in the transcript I read. And I would, it's very strange, because then from connecting with Chris, the same two friends told me, you need to connect with Diana Pasulka. And I thought, well, you know, what's Diana Pasulka going to want with me? Like, I watched a couple of her videos and I just thought she was amazing, and what a great mind and a great person that she is. And I was a bit intimidated, and I thought, oh, I don't know. I don't, I could tell her my experiences, but I'm just one of many people that have had experiences. Um, but then synchronicities happened. And because I was involved in making the Hollywood film Color Out of Space with Richard Stanley, who I was living with in Montsegur at the time when we made that movie, I then saw that Diana was doing an online conference for Morbid Anatomy, talking about the UFO and how it is portrayed in the media, particularly in film. And Color Out of Space was going to be discussed on this conference. And so I contacted, and I saw that my friend David Metcalf was presenting this with her. And so I contacted David and said, David, I would absolutely love to make contact with Diana and share my experiences with her. And so he introduced me to Diana. And then as soon as we connected, she said, Amanda, were you involved in that opening ritual of that film? And I said, I was indeed. And she said, well, as soon as I watched it, I knew whoever it was who made that movie knew what they were doing. And then I also wondered, did they know what they were doing? Um, and so that's how our friendship began. And she then asked me if I would speak about my experiences making Color Out of Space at this online conference with her, David Metcalf, Whitley Strieber, and John Ramirez. And so I did. And that is how the whole UFO world opened up to me, because up until that point, I didn't know anything about any of this.
And how do you see now that the world has welcome, first of all, Amanda, to the UFO world, um, but also how did this transformation into the understanding? Because I see, I don't. I used to think, you know, I would say many years ago, I would say a couple of years ago, maybe 2 years ago, my thought process was that it was little green aliens. I had never understood until I would say about a year and a half ago the trajectory, the vast enormity of the. I would say it's the phenomenon itself, that it's not just black and white little green aliens in a spaceship visiting here from some other planet. You know what I mean? That it is so much more than that. And so, what have you learned crossing in and just adding in this UFO idea or world into what you've already been studying?
That is a really good question. And I would say that I'm still learning. There's still so much that I don't know. And also, even despite sharing my experiences with Diana and with the people on her conference, um, and then reaching out and connecting with Jack Sarfati and some of the people listening in to this, like my friends Juan and Steve and Chester and others who are involved in this world. I was scared and I took a step back. When I realized how high and how deep this goes, I was quite scared. And I remember saying this to Diana as well, and saying, well, I can accept deities, I can accept miracles, I can accept precognition, retrocognition, and everything else, but physical craft, um, like things that yeah, are material elements. They were the things that I found really kind of difficult to understand. And then I think the contagion effect of this is very real, as well, as I'm sure you all know listening in, and maybe you also know, Sarah. But there was one encounter that I had after I started to open up to this. It's almost as if when you open up, it it starts to show itself more, perhaps, with that willingness or that interest. But I did a clairvoyant reading for a man who was a contactee from Texas, and I'd never. I had one encounter with something I saw in the sky when I was in Montsegur when I was with Richard, and we both saw it. But that was like a luminous jellyfish that was gigantic, neon blue and white, and that knew we were watching it, and it put on a show for us, and we both saw that. That blew my mind, and I just put it out of my mind because I didn't want to think about it. But then I had other experiences with lights in the sky, things like that, also in the mountains, and that I'd put out of my mind. But then when I made this contact with Diana and spoke about the things that had happened, I realized I couldn't pretend that this wasn't real anymore.
And if we could be a fly on that wall with you and Diana discussing your experiences versus her religious studies, what quite possibly did the two of you, come to agreement on, break down, discuss? Like, what was the center of your conversation, if you don't mind sharing?
No, not at all. Well, we came to agreement about a great many things because, as you know, my background was religious also, with my sort of feminist theology studies and my kind of beginning as a religious person, I suppose, and then my experiences in the little chapels and the female mystics. So we had that very much in common, and I think we both recognize that this is a spiritual phenomenon, and I still believe that to be true. I think Jack feels that as well. Jack Sarvati feels that it's a spiritual phenomenon also, and pretty much most of the people that I've connected with see it that way. Um, and the more I look into it, the more I feel like it's all part of the same thing, but it's different manifestations of something mysterious and complex. Diana and I, yeah, we shared a lot because we realized that we had a lot of things in common immediately when we first started talking, and our viewpoints aligned on a lot of things.
Is this maybe the moment that I'm not sure where you want to go next, so I'm going to put out a couple of possibilities. But is this there quite possible? Could we move into the bloodlines through this? Like, I know that there's religious tie-ins with the bloodlines.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good segue because well, when I was in France, the way this whole thing got started for me was in 2009. I had a dream, and in that dream, I was kneeling in a church with two chalices, one containing semen and one containing menstrual blood, and I was told by a man who I couldn't see that I needed to pour the contents of these chalices into a rectangular shape on the ground in front of me that was outlined in bronze and that had a line running through the center of it, which he called the arcanum. And so in this dream, I knew that I had to merge the two substances together so that they touched this line in the center of this rectangle. And in my dream, I understood this as being a timeline, and because I had no understanding of what I was seeing in my dream, I thought it was connected to the Meridian line in Greenwich in London. Um, and so I did as he said. And then as I'd completed the ritual, he told me, now run. And three men dressed in black came and tried to stop me. Then I woke up, and in that time, I'd never seen the Da Vinci Code. I'd never read the book. I wasn't interested in the Holy Blood, the Holy Grail. I had no knowledge of any of those things because in 2009, I was still repressing my abilities and repressing who I am and trying to live a normal life as a psychologist. And so I didn't want to be what I was. And yeah, I was in denial. And so when I had that dream, I knew that that was not an ordinary dream. I knew it was a significant spiritual, perhaps precognitive dream. Not that I saw myself doing that ritual in a church, but that it had significant meaning. And so, like I did in 2013 with the encounter that I had, that led me to Iona Miller, I then went to Google the next day and typed in semen menstrual blood arcanum and came upon the writings of a man called Nicholas de Vere. And Nicholas was writing about this concept of royal bloodlines from a very different perspective. And he was speaking about this idea that in the past, the reason why bloodlines were so insular and why they selected who they interacted with so strictly was because they were trying to preserve psychic and spiritual abilities within those bloodlines. And he was speaking about this in great depth in the things that I read. And everything that he said resonated in me. It was like I was reading the truth. And at the time, I didn't know what to do with this. And I was simultaneously compelled and wanted to reach out to him, and at the same time scared, because I knew that if I did, my life would change and I wouldn't be able to go back. And so I vacillated and I didn't make contact with him. But then in 2013, when I had that encounter with the white light and I was healed, and then I made contact with Iona Miller, she then said to me, "Have you ever met anyone else through a vision or a dream or an encounter like this?" And I said, "Well, I had this dream in 2009, and it led me to the work of a man called Nicholas de Vere." And she said, "Well, not only do I know Nick, but I built that website that you found in 2009. So 2009, 2013, two separate events led me to two people, both speaking about this concept of these sacred bloodlines and what it really meant." And so the way I look at Nicholas's work, just to be clear, is that I see a lot of it as metaphorical. It's not that I think all of this is absolute fact, but it's almost as if the things that he writes about are keys that open doors in our consciousness. And if we're willing and able, we can walk through those doors and then find a greater reality. And so when I came back to his work years later through Iona and then through meeting these people in France, the first thing they said to me when I went to France as well was, well, you must be a member of the bloodline to have found us in the first place like this. And they would do a lot of things before I was initiated, like they would give psychic information and see if I would pick it up. They would put words out and say, "What does this word mean to you?" And then I'd have that word would have come into my mind like earlier in the day. And then I'd say, "Oh, I don't know, but that word came into my mind at like 11 o'clock." So they were kind of testing my abilities, and that's what they do, because one of the things that Nicholas said, Nicholas is quite a controversial character, but one of the things that he said is that it's no good just having the blood, it's what we do with it. If we have the abilities, we are duty bound to use them and use them to help others. And so the way I kind of came upon all of that was through these dreams and visions, and then meeting Iona, and then going to France, where all of these initial initiatory orders that I was invited into were on this basis of having this genetic capacity for heightened psychic, spiritual abilities, I would say. And they tested those facilities. But one of the things that I learned, and I think this is important, is that just because someone has the blood or just because they have abilities, it doesn't mean that they're a good person. It doesn't mean that they have ethics. And I discovered that there's a dark side to all of this as well, which I'm sure people are aware of. And I think now when a lot of people think about the bloodlines, they think only about the dark side of it. But there is a very positive aspect to it as well. And I think that is represented by a lot of what Nick and Iona were trying to achieve.
So, regarding that idea, I mean, definitely when I think of bloodlines, I do think of the negative aspect of that. In my research, I've looked into the 13 bloodlines. There's a list of them. You guys can look into them yourselves. Obviously, many of them are people that are still in power today. Um, and so, of course, there's that negative aspect of like, oh my gosh, you know, they rule the world, they're the decision makers. And then you said there's also this positive side of the bloodlines. And this brings me to I always say this wrong, the Merovian, I'm probably saying this wrong, the Merovian bloodline, which would be Jesus's bloodline. And I was just wondering if you could unwrap that for us. And do you think that quite possibly that's the one of, if there are others, the good bloodlines that possibly are here to protect against the bad ones? Or how do you see that? I don't know. Maybe I'm making it too black and white.
No, I think that's a really good way of looking at it. And yes, the Merovingians, and
Merovingian,
um,
yes.
Merovingians, yeah, and the Merovingians are a funny lot. And yeah, I am obviously, like many people, related to them, as I found out. But they, yeah, they claimed to have their bloodline sired by Mero, the sea god. So I think I mentioned to you when we were talking privately about this concept that many of the ancient noble families claim to have had some kind of divine forefather or foremother. And one of the most prolific and significant ones in France is the bloodline also of Melusine. So we have Mero, we have Melusine, who was again a woman who was also part hybrid. She was supposedly like a mermaid, or also some people say she had a serpent's tail. And then she was the foremother of another royal house. And so the way that the Jesus bloodline, so to speak, was described to me in France, they call it the desposny, which was a word that I'd never heard before. And so the desposny bloodline is one in which, the way I see it, like perhaps metaphorically and perhaps literally, is that the divine spark of the Christ, because like the Cathars, I believe the Christ was a real person, but that the spirit of the Christ came into the man. And that's what the Cathars also believed, which is why they were persecuted and killed as heretics. And so I think what we've experienced a lot of in our history is these spirits or beings coming into human form, whether that is permanently or temporarily, and then changing the DNA of those that they have contact with. And so when I was in France and I was going through all of these initiations and these experiences, I met a lot of people who were from different bloodlines connected to this, and they're very interested in let's just say keeping contact with their own and bringing people back into the fold. Because one of the things that Nick writes about, he calls it the elven holocaust, and he says that the elves, the dragons, he's got different metaphors for people who have these abilities. And he said that the reason we have the problems that we have now is that in the beginning, the people who were leading the tribes were not the ones who were the strongest or the most violent or the most cunning. They were the ones who could see clearly. And that's what, to Nick, the dragon consciousness means. It's to see clearly. Because the original root, of the word dragon means to see clearly, according to him. And so originally, the people who were leading our tribes in the past, before we had what we have now in civilization, were the seers, the ones who could see what was coming and get people out of the way and warn them and say, okay, there's going to be a disaster. We need to move to a higher place. We need to get out of here. Don't eat that. That's poisonous. Don't go over there. Don't cause war with that person over there, because this will happen. And throughout history, the seers have always been the ones initially who were leading when we had a tribal situation. This is according to Nick. And then according to him, what then happened is the seers were disrespected when we no longer had as many cataclysms to watch out for. The seers were disrespected and the warriors took over by force. And according to him, that's what we now have in power. People who are warriors but are also using seers to get their own knowledge.
You know, as you were describing all of this, something that came to my mind was, you know, how they say that history is written by the victors. And so my thought
Mm-hmm.
process, please do not shoot me, is what if quite possibly the Bible or earlier versions of the Bible or even the King James Bible that was written, I don't know, a couple hundred years ago, rewritten, or I'm sorry to say, stories of it were voted on to decide which ones would go into the Bible. And in my mind, as you're speaking about all of this, it makes me think that this was written by the victors and that the seers that you're talking about were almost, and by written by the victors, I mean like they were retelling the story to follow their idea of what they wanted people to learn and know and hide the truth, which is sort of what you were tapping on of the idea that quite possibly the NHI, who is coming down, or um, spiritual entities that are coming down and embodying and changing our DNA. You know what I mean? I don't know where I'm going with this. I feel like, though, that there was quite possibly, this is the giant cover up, quite possibly. Am I making sense?
100% agree with you.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that was just a thought. I was like making notes as you were going. I'm like, hold on, I'm seeing things. Um, it's fascinating because a lot of people, you know, or a lot of people, myself, one of the things I'm very nervous about is that this disclosure movement becomes completely, um, you know, religious. And it's like, well, I think that there's more to it than it just being this black and white religion. And so, something else that you tapped on that I'd like to ask you about is the idea that, and I know Steve and Juan are in the audience, the old gods, and the idea that, which now makes sense to me, like these old gods are going to come back, but not in the way that maybe I was thinking before, but quite possibly spiritually, in the sense that, like, where they would briefly take over, like you said, Jesus. It was the spirit that took over the man. Am I making sense? Is that somehow?
You
Oh,
are.
good. Okay.
You're making perfect
Okay,
sense.
I'm trying to make sure I'm following along. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for sharing with all of this. And then the holy, did we touch upon the Holy Grail at all?
Well, yeah, not yet. And so when I was living in France, I went to a little book fair in the countryside with my then partner and met a man who had a load of books written about Rennes le Chateau. Now, this was when I was living just outside Paris, and so I knew nothing about Rennes le Chateau and never heard of it. Like I said, I wasn't really interested in any of those things. But this man, for some reason, took a shine to me. And then when he heard that my surname was Radcliffe, when I introduced myself, he he said, "Are you related to Charles Radcliffe, who was one of the people that introduced Freemasonry to France?" And I said, "Yes, as far as I know, that's what my dad said." At the time, I didn't know for sure. And he then invited me and my then partner to his house and grilled us in his library for about 5 hours, asking us so many questions. And then, when he had ascertained that we were deemed worthy, he took us upstairs and he had this room behind a sliding wall. So, you know, one of those false walls that you just touch and then it slides. And then he had this door with like a bank lock on it that he had a code to get into. And then inside there, he had an office. And inside the office, he had a computer. And inside, also in the office, he had a kind of vault. And he had the original scrolls from the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail that Henry Lincoln and others only had photocopies of, and also ones that had never ever been published. And he told me that 50 years before, he'd been in Montsegur doing some research, and then he'd gone for a drink in Rennes-le-Chateau, and he was sitting in a cafe in Rennes-le-Chateau. It was before Rennes-le-Chateau was famous, and a man overheard him speaking to his wife at the time about his research, and asked him if he'd be interested in learning about the true history of Rennes-le-Chateau. And so, as he was there, he said yes, and the man again kind of grilled him for a number of hours, and then, deeming him worthy, asked if he'd be interested in purchasing some artifacts. And so this man, whose name I can't give his name, but he had some artifacts from there, and he also had these scrolls, which he paid an enormous amount of money for. And the man told him that he could publish some of them, but not all, and that if he was to publish all of them, he'd be hunted down and dealt with. So this was a very intense experience, and at that time, I knew then. I wasn't, particularly interested in it, but I knew about Dan Brown film that I'd watched the Da Vinci Code with my then partner because he insisted that I watch it. And I'd been joking to my friends back in England saying, oh, I'm living the real life Da Vinci Code. And it was just a joke. But then as I was sitting in that man's office, a horrible creeping feeling came upon me that I really was living in the real life Da Vinci Code, because he was showing me on his computer how he was cracking the code of these documents, with help from a code breaker that he was working with. And I became extremely overwhelmed and had to leave the room because I just couldn't actually believe what I was seeing. And one of the things that he said to me is that these coded papers, the things that he was not permitted to publish. Now, there has been a book written about this since, so I am permitted to say, but it was stating that there was a faction of people within the church who believed this about Christ, that he was an otherworldly being that entered into a man, and that the bloodline was then created through his relation with Mary Magdalene, and that bloodline continued, and the people of that bloodline continued in that area and that region of France where Rennes-le-Chateau is. And so this man told me all of these things. And he also told me that there was a map that supposedly led to the tomb of Mary Magdalene, but also that in their beliefs, it wasn't only the tomb of Mary Magdalene, but that Jesus himself was also there. And I said to him, well, have you been to this place? Did you go to this location? And he said, yes, but when I got there, it had already been dynamited and I couldn't get inside. And I said, well, what would you have done if you'd gone inside and you'd found two tombs and they'd be carbon dated and found to be from that time? He said, I would have closed up the entrance and pretended it never happened. And I said, but why? And he said, because it would destroy Christianity as we know it. And I said, well, why? And he said, because the whole point of Christianity rests upon the principle of the resurrection, the bodily resurrection. And he said, if we found bodies and they could be, carbon dated to that time, and it all adds up with the oral tradition and all of these things that have been hidden, it would destroy Christianity.
Yes, it's mind blowing. I mean, it's just absolutely mind blowing because it's almost as if I'm with you. Like, why? I mean, not that I want to destroy anything, but there's something, and maybe instead of looking at it as destroying, but something that can be pulled from that. Like which is the truth. Of which I'm not even
Yeah.
sure. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not even sure what the truth. You know what I mean? This is just the thoughts that are coming from what I'm hearing you say, you know?
Yeah, for me, from everything I experienced when I was over there and having had this experience with him, like for me, the bloodline of Christ and Christ himself is a powerful, beautiful, loving spirit like the lady, a God like the lady. And if he was able to take possession of a human man for some reason, and then that man went on to sire children, then potentially the children would be born with some of that beautiful spiritual power in their DNA. That's how I see it. And that's how the people in France that I connected with later saw it.
And it's almost though, because one of the biggest, I mean, I read the Da Vinci Code and saw the movie, but it's almost one of the line, you know, the underlying factors is the protection of that bloodline. Are you saying that? So you're saying that your last name Radcliffe is part of the Freemasons that started up in France, but are you also part of that bloodline, the Moravian bloodline?
Yeah,
Wow, that's amazing.
yeah. And they're just, it's
That's
just one
amazing.
of many. It's just one of many that are relevant. Excuse me. There, yeah, but there is a faction of people that really do believe this. And what I now believe, as a result of becoming aware of the UFO NHI world, is that, like I said to you in our private conversation, I have an understanding now of how these encounters happen to some of us and why some of us have more of them than others. And I do think that it is part of our genetic inheritance.
Please, Amanda, I would love if you feel comfortable to share what you shared with me privately, which was like mind blowing. And there are many experiencers that I am seeing in the space right now. And so if you feel comfortable sharing this, that would be amazing.
Yeah. So I think this is really one of the most important things. And when I first um, was speaking with Diana and I was trying to understand my experiences, um, I picked up a book in my friend's house about Skinwalker Ranch, and I just opened it randomly on a page. I've never read anything about Skinwalker Ranch. I don't know really much about it. But the page I opened it on was about a woman who visited Skinwalker Ranch, and I think she was one of the investigators. And she was grazed on the shoulder by a blue orb. And 2 weeks later, I think it was, or not long afterwards anyway, she developed an autoimmune condition. And this friend who I was with, he knows a lot about UFOs. He'd been studying this for years, and he'd had his own experiences with orbs. And I was just, he was always asking me questions about the lady because he was also a bit 14, one of those people that believes extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. And he was very cautious about the lady as well. And he was saying, well, how do you know she's good? And how do you know this? And I just kept saying, well, by their fruits we shall know them. And all she has brought into my life is good. And anyway, in this particular incident, I was wondering why this woman had this negative effect from a blue orb, given that supposedly an orb is a non physical energy or whatever it is. And I sat in meditation and I asked the lady, and the lady showed me that the orb, when it came into contact with her shoulder, transmitted something like an energy transmission into her energy system, which also affected her biology, that was so alien to her biology that her biology had an immediate allergic reaction kind of effect. And that allergic reaction then became a full body autoimmune reaction because the body couldn't cope with this influx of this information that was so different than anything it was familiar with before. And so I found that really interesting. And so I asked for more information. And then I asked, well, how come when I had my experiences, I never got a negative reaction? Is it because the blue orb was negative, or is it because she just wasn't prepared for it, that her body wasn't prepared for that? And what I was shown is that my experiences were not negative and had no physical negative effects upon me because my DNA was already primed for this. And the reason for this was because someone in my history, in my family history, had already been a contactee and had already had physical contact like I have had with these beings. And so they had already had this perhaps autoimmune reaction, and their bodies had then recovered from that. And then when they went on to have children, we were already born with that in us, with that immunity in us, but not only with the immunity to these events, but also I think a propensity for them. Because it's almost as if once the information transfer happens in a bloodline, it kind of stays there and it may slumber, but I think it always reawakens. It may take a few generations, but it seems like it's always there. And so when I thought about this more, I thought, well, the orbs must contain some kind of quantum data of some kind. And when they interact with the human energy system, that data is transferred and it has an impact. And that impact can be positive, negative, or neutral, depending on what that person is already inside of them, and what they've already come into contact with. And so when I thought about this more, I then shared this idea with a friend of mine in Canada who's a researcher who's made a couple of documentaries about orbs. And he shared with me a redacted document from an aerospace engineer who, this was years before I even knew this man. So they'd had this conversation, I think it was in 2016. And this was 2 years ago when I had the conversation with this man who I won't name. And this aerospace engineer was working directly with orbs and said that they had observed quantum data transfer between orbs and humans. And the document that I sent to you, Sarah, it goes into more detail. But in other words, it seemed to verify what the lady had shown me. And then I thought about, well, how does that impact all of us who are experiencers? And I thought, well, it means that someone in our history has had an encounter and their DNA has been changed and they've been primed, then their children have been primed to have encounters and also immune to the negative effects, perhaps.
I know this is, to me, this is mind blowing, and it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense hearing different experiencers throughout the last year and a half that I've been in spaces. I've had the fortunate experience to listen to many, not all of them, but many, and I definitely see a correlation with this. This is it's amazing. It's truly amazing. What we have covered a lot. It is 2 hours in. I wanted to just check and see how you're doing.
I'm good.
Oh, good. I'm very glad because I'm good, and this has just been really amazing and an uplifting space. I have to say. And so, is there anything that I'm missing? I think that I've gone through all of the beats that you and I wanted to cover, but is there anything that I'm missing that you wanted to add on?
No, not at all. I mean, my motivation for speaking out about my story is that I want to give that sense of upliftment to people who've had these experiences. One of the reasons the lady has been telling me that I need to speak is because there is a lot of negativity in the world right now. And also when it comes to talking about UFOs and these experiences, I know a lot of people have had very scary experiences as well. And I feel like the lady, in the same way that she has said these things to Chris, she wants me also to speak out about the fact that there are positive beings that want to help us and that are here for good, and that they really want us to know that we're not alone. And if anyone listening goes away with anything today, that is the deepest message that she's always wanted me to say. And one of the things that she told me in one of my experiences in Montsegur is that she doesn't want to be worshipped. She wants only to have her people brought back to her because she loves us.
And thank you for sharing that, because she had told you most recently that it's time now for this, right? Am I right that this it's time for you to come forward and to explain your story?
Yeah, that's right. And our mutual friends, Luann and Steve, know that I've been waiting for the right moment for a while, um, because of the amount of negativity and fear. And I've even heard people saying that the lady is evil, that Chris is deluded, that she's some kind of evil NHI in a dress, tricking us all. But I thought about this a lot, and like I said, my encounters have only ever been positive and have only ever brought good into my life and good into the lives of the people around me.
And what are your thoughts on those who, because I have sat in experience or spaces that are traumatic and awful, for the experiencers that have experienced awful experiences. What are, like, abductions and rape and bodily mutilation and whatnot. I have to ask this because this is something that sits with me a lot. What are your thoughts on this, or what do you think the lady represents, or you know what I mean? How can you unravel this part, maybe?
Yeah, it's very interesting that you mentioned that, because just before we started the space, I was having a conversation with a friend who was telling me about a friend of his who'd had these experiences. And when I did the online conference with Diana, obviously Whitley was there, and um, when we had the Q&A, I had a couple of conversations with him about his own experiences because they were also very traumatic. Um, my answer to this is that I don't know, but I remembered earlier when I was speaking with my friend Chris about our mutual friend that had these experiences, that when I was younger, I used to wake up with something trying to pull me out of my body or get inside my body. And I sometimes used to sit up, bolt upright in bed with my arms out, pushing out and saying no. And I hadn't thought about this in years until just before our conversation this evening. And I realized it was something, again, it was one of those types of being that has malevolent intentions. And it was a male, it was definitely a male energy. And it was like it wanted to possess me or take over my body and get something from me. But I used to wake up before he could do it and say no. Um, so I'm not in any way discounting that any of these experiences are real, because I know that they are. And Whitley, I feel for Whitley, because every time I think about his story and about how brave and courageous he is, I just tear up everything that he's been through. And when I, read about other people's experiences, which is only a very recent thing for me, the only kind of answer that I have is, in the same way as we have evil humans, I think we have evil beings. And I do wonder sometimes if the evil beings try to work through humans as well to make their wishes manifest here in this realm. Um, as to why they do this, the only information that I've got from this so far is some kind of predatory, parasitic kind of nature, in the same way that we have predators and parasites in nature here on this planet. And one thing I do know, however, and that I can share, and I can't say where I got this from, but it's someone very high up who knows what they're talking about. I was told that they know the people in power know that the lady has dominion over all of these beings. And I don't know whether that is why I was somehow protected, if she's kind of always been there next to me since I was a child because of some reason or other, or if, sometimes I know her power is not omnipotent here as well, because unfortunately we have so many different forms of life and different situations happening that are incredibly complex.
Yes, I've been thinking about that too, and I agree. I agree. It definitely feels as the yin and the yang, the positive and the negative. That they're yeah, that makes sense, and I understand that. Yes.
I was told that if people are going through this, they can call upon the lady. I'm sure they've tried all kinds of things when people are terrorized, praying all kinds of things, and it doesn't work. But I was told by this person who I can't name that if people call upon the lady, it wasn't Chris, if people call upon the lady, that it might help. So it's worth me mentioning that just in case it may help somebody.
Thank you, Amanda. Would you be okay if I invited people up from the listener section to ask questions?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. If anyone is interested in asking Amanda any questions, please hit the request button and I will bring you up. And we can focus on asking questions instead of elongated shares. And I see Jay Just. Absolutely. I know that she's got some great questions. Jay Just, welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Sarah, for holding the space and Amanda for being here. I have a few questions. I know I only can ask a few, but I was really curious when you described the experience you had when you were taken to somewhere else and you were taught about reincarnation and saw where souls go. And what did you get an idea of what the purpose of all this is? Because I really struggle with that.
Yeah, I didn't get any kind of answer. It was more of an understanding that even though it sounds bizarre because of how much we suffer here, like we choose, that we do get to choose, and that we can step off that wheel and return into the center of that dimension if we understand how. And that, I think, is what she was trying to teach me. She was trying to show me the how of that. Does
And
that
would
help? Yeah.
Yeah, but would that be doing like core work about like goodness and being good, and expanding your awareness? Or like what is the work that you have to do that one can do? I'm curious.
Yeah, that's a really good question. She was speaking to me about this idea of purification of the negative emotions, and that is one of the things. I mean, I know so many religious traditions say this, but when I saw it for myself, and then I had that experience when the energy came up and purified me before she came into my body, I understood it from a more personal level rather than it just being a should that's put onto us from outside. And so the understanding that I had is that working with our negative emotions, like to try and purify ourselves from them, even though it's really hard, was something that was quite important. And then the other side of it was our consciousness. And so I think people talk about raising consciousness. And what I understood is that it's not so much about raising consciousness, it's about making our consciousness coherent, which meant focused on a particular goal. And if our goal is spiritual evolution, then our consciousness needs to be focused on that no matter what's happening outside of us. And that is so difficult, isn't it? Because we have so many things always happening here.
Yes. Um that's true. So another question is, why did the beings come to you in a certain form? Just the lady, and then Chris Bledsoe, his came to the form of aliens, or what we deem as, your typical gray, because his experience is similar to a lot of abductee experiences, being put on a ship, having something done to him, and beings around him that initially scared him. And then the lady came afterwards, I believe.
Yeah, that's a really good question as well. So one of the things that Diana said to me, she told me a story about a couple that were out walking one day, and they both saw something in the sky. And the man, I think, was an atheist, and the woman was a Catholic, if I remember rightly. And the man saw an orange orb, and the woman saw a flying saucer, like a silver disc. And they both saw the same thing at the same time, but completely differently. And in my own encounters, every experience that I've had with the lady, she's looked slightly different, even though she's been absolutely the same being each time. And certainly when Richard saw the lady, she looked very different. And Chris, when he saw her, she looked very different. But it's the same being with a different appearance each time. And my understanding is that this is something to do with how they interface with our consciousness. And I'd been very against UFOs. I'd known about them, but I'd been very closed to the idea. And so I guess if these beings are trying to make contact, they use whatever form we're going to be understanding of or accepting of, if they're good, if they're not, trying to force themselves upon us.
Well, speaking about that, and I have other questions, but this will be my last one for now, if Sarah allows me to ask again. Um, if they can force our opinions or do bad in the world, do you believe that there's an all-knowing God that has dominion over his creation or its creation? Or do you think that it's something different than what we um, usually see? Like,
Yeah,
what is your concept of that?
that's another really good question. I've thought about this a lot. And, I think about it in terms of human evil alone, let alone what NHIs might be doing to us. And I don't know, actually. I can only say that I think that the experience that I had when I was taken up and I saw this divine feminine power, this dimensional power, from there, everything was beautiful, even the horrible stuff. And that sounds so hard to say when we go through so much horrible stuff, but that's what I was shown. And the same when I had the encounter with the lady when she came into my body and she was overpouring with compassion for our suffering. And at the same time, showing me that there was a bigger picture that I was not aware of, that none of us are aware of when we're in it. It was almost as if she was showing me, I'm sorry that it has to be this way, but this is the way that it is. And, we are here for you, but we're sorry that you have to go through all of this. So I don't know, because I can't claim to know God, but I can only speak of my own experiences.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. Just we'll get. Hopefully, I'm sure there'll be time you can ask some more. Let's just head over to Pix. Pix, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Hey, Sarah, great space. Appreciate you doing it. Amanda, what an amazing testimony you shared. Just loving listening to what you have to elucidate for us. And on that last point, that tracks with the traditional view of Hathor as bringing the peace and destruction both. So that those dual aspects would seem to line up with what you said. But anyway, my question is really about, you talked about the Merovingians and the Languedoc and the Cathars. My understanding is that the Knights Templar have a deep interest in that region and have a history of the true lineage of Christ, very similar to what you're talking about. I was just curious if you could tell us what you know about the involvement of the Knights Templar in this tradition of the, let's just say, alternative history of Christ. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Yeah, great question. And I did come across a lot of information about the Knights Templar and discovered that they were very active in actually protecting the Cathars, believe it or not, during the Albigensian Crusade. Some of them were. And in that region of France where I was living, there was a big Templar commandery in a place now called Campagne-sur-Aude, which was one of the most important commanderies in the whole of France. And the king himself came there before they did the terrible things that they did to the Knights Templar. It was said that in that location, treasure was buried underneath. Underneath the commandery that is still there. There is a legend that there is treasure buried beneath that commandery because there is a necropolis under there where there are many bodies of the Knights Templar, but no one has ever been permitted to go in there and investigate because the French government likes to keep these things covered up. However, regarding the idea or reality of the fact that the Templars were protecting these bloodlines, I can say that I did find out that that was absolutely true. I met somebody who I can't name, but he was a member of one of these particular bloodlines from the Languedoc region, and he was Merovingian, and he was also Knights Templar, and he told me that the ancestral Templars were absolutely protecting these bloodlines, and not only that, but they were actually helping to how can I put this? They were spreading the seed, and so the men of these bloodlines were actually expected to father children with women who were placed in certain families who would then raise those children as their own with their own husbands, but they were not fathered by the husband, if that makes sense. And so this is part of the tradition of protecting the bloodlines. They would actually bring these children into their own families.
That's fascinating. Interestingly enough, I had Tim Hogan's a friend of mine who runs a contemporary Knights Templar, and he claims that they have six, possibly seven Arks of the Covenant, and they actually say that they have the ossuary. I know that you'd referenced that there's supposedly a crypt in Languedoc that was, blown up, but supposedly they have the ossuary that came from the found, relic keeping spot that the Christian family, Christ family, was in. It's very interesting. I've seen the pictures.
Amazing. I know Tim actually. A little bit. Yeah, so I understand what you're speaking of.
Nice. I would love to hear you and Tim have a long conversation. That'd be fascinating. And Scott Walter.
Well, if you would like to set that up, do. I would be happy to do so.
Oh, you're in trouble now.
That would
Thank you for your question.
that would be amazing. Pix, do you have any more questions?
Nope, just give me some times if you'd like to do that space.
Okay.
Yes, please let me know as well. I would love to listen. Um,
Yep, because you're co-host.
okay. Amanda, are you guys talking about Tim Taylor? Or I'm assuming you don't know Tim Taylor, Pix. So this would be a different Tim, right? Tim
Tim
Hogan. Thank you
Hogan.
for clarifying. Um, have you met with Amanda Tim Taylor? He was in Diana's book, and Chris Bledsoe was also good friends with him for a number of years.
Sorry, were you asking me that question?
Oh, I was. Sorry. Have you met?
No, I haven't made contact with Tim Taylor yet. No.
I was just curious. Yes, he was friends with the Bledsoes for a while, and also with Diana, and went to the Vatican archives with her, which is fascinating because it's very difficult to get in there. I'm very jealous.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that was one of my questions when we were on the phone was, did Diana tell you what she was looking for or found in the Vatican?
No is the answer to that.
Darn
I
it.
did not.
Darn it. I'm so, yes. One day I hope to talk to her. I'm very excited about learning what she has learned. So
Yeah, she's an amazing woman.
before we move to J Just really quick, I have a question for you. It's like an overall, I guess, like what at this point in your life, and of course we all know learning new things and having new experiences changes us, but at this point in your life, what do you think your purpose is, with all of your experience and in your being part of the bloodlines, and then what do you think our purpose is, overall for being here as a human race?
Brilliant questions. I'm working on a book at the moment about all of these experiences, and that has been ongoing for a while. And the most important thing I keep being told is that I have to speak, I have to speak, I have to speak about this, about my experiences, and share them with the world, share them with other people, and also give other people the chance to understand how to make contact for themselves with these types of beings and to develop their own consciousness and their own abilities. I also understand that if we are brought together, we're brought together for a reason. And I think that this conversation that is happening now, it's not a chance. It's an important thing to be speaking about this for the first time publicly. And I'm very grateful to be here with you and with this community sharing this for the first time.
I'm very grateful and thankful that you're here with us as well, and I'm very humbled and that I'm hosting you. So I thank you so much for being here. I'm going to go to J Just and I'm going to bring Mac up. Go ahead, J Just.
Thanks, Sarah. And you couldn't get a better hostess than Sarah. She's very gracious. Um, I want to say a few things, and then maybe I'll have questions from someone in the audience, and I might have my own. But first of all, there's talk about how people from NASA, I think it was Tim Taylor himself or others who, um, the astronauts themselves have had experiences with the lady, and they seem to chase people who've had experiences. Example, Bledsoe. Um, I guess, do you feel as if the whole of um, the ET phenomena is something that is not from other world but more dimensional, interdimensional? Because that's
Yes,
one thing Grush said in his testimony.
yeah, I do. My own experiences, that's the only conclusion that I can make.
And what about time travel? Does time travel have anything to do with it? People say, like, there was testimony about Corso. Sarah knows this. It's her thing. Saying that these were future people from our future or our future coming back.
Yeah,
Do you have any clarity on that as well?
yeah, I think some of them are, yes, but not all.
Yes,
Okay.
that was something that so Corso, Colonel Corso, Philip J. Corso wrote the book The Day After Roswell. Um, he's a very long, but yet part of the UFO lore, and he passed, I think, in the early O's, and his son, Philip Corso Jr., in 2018 was being interviewed, and he said that he doesn't believe that this is a UFO thing, that he believes that a UFO cover up, that he believes that this is a time travel cover up. What does that make? What does that say to you? Like, what do you take from that sentence, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, I think that it's true, but I also think that time operates in a different way than we currently know. And whatever time travel is, I think, I don't know, but I've been having conversations with Juan and Steve and Jack and my friend Christoph about this, who all know a hell of a lot more than I do about the mechanics of all of this. But what the lady was telling me is that we need to be looking into plasma engineering, and that time, given my experiences, given that I've gone back in time in my consciousness and so on and so forth, I think time is a measure of our consciousness as much as it is affecting our physical world. And there's something there that I don't fully understand yet, and I'm hoping that greater minds than I do. And if I can give them, any of this information from the lady, and it may help with this, then I'm happy to do that. But I don't know.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Mac, welcome to the stage. How are you? And please go ahead.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm really good. It's about 7:40 in the morning. I hope you can hear me. I'm just driving to work. Amanda, thank you so much for your bravery in coming out. I'm going to listen to the debate later on, but I've been in. I've had a conversation with Bledsoe indirectly, and I won't really get into it. But I had an experience with the lady, but she called herself the mother. She called herself my mother, and she's always given these cryptic messages, really profound messages. And one of the messages that he told me that resonates with you, that I want to tell you, is that there are no coincidences. There's only connections. And that's why I believe we're all here. We've met each other. So I really appreciate you. I'm really fascinated by your story. There's a lot of common threads. So I'm going to be listening in on it. I just wanted to say hello and introduce myself as a lifelong experiencer of the phenomenon, with close contact with NHI, orb, spirit beings, the whole lot. So I'd love to be in touch with you through the back channel. So thank you so
Yeah,
much for letting me speak.
please do. And thank you so much for sharing that. That is so beautiful. I'm very touched. And she's called herself my mother also.
Yeah, she called herself the mother, and the way that she came to me through my first regression a couple of years ago was the, like you said, they come to you that makes you most comfortable. And this being came to me as a woman with really long dark hair, but her eyes were almost like that of a gray alien, but even more elongated. And the most amazing thing about that memory through that regression was the details in her eyes. They were like you would see oil on water, pink and purple swirls. So I have a very, very distinct memory and interaction with her about that. And she kept saying, "Remember who you are," giving me a whole bunch of different messages, which I'll speak to you in the back channels. Anyway, I don't want to take up your time, but thank you so much. Appreciate
Thank
you
you.
and UFOSara. Thank you so much, and all the wonderful people on here. I appreciate you all.
Thank you, Mac. Yeah, if you guys want to befriend each other, then you could DM each other. So just throwing that out there. J. Just, did you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question from the audience, from Interstellar. Let me just scroll. Uh,
And Interstellar went and was with Chris Bledsoe. Was it in the spring a couple of months ago? And
Mhm.
yeah, sorry, just
Yeah,
throwing that out there.
yeah, he went to the Azalea Festival, and he's also an experiencer. And he went there, and he was part of a whole I don't know, they did some sort of thing at the end where anyways, so his question is, did the lady give any messages for the future of humanity? And did the lady mention to you anything about the age of Aquarius and the new knowledge in 2026, as she did with Bledsoe?
No, she did not. And that is one of the curious things. The encounters that I've had with her so far have not given anything like that, which is quite different than what Chris has been through.
So you feel it's for your own growth. Your interactions with her are for your own growth and whatever growth others around you have to do.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is that she wanted me to know that she was real and that there are others out there who have had encounters with her as well. And one of the things that she said to me was she wanted me to bring together the others. So I'm guessing that means other people who've experienced her. And another thing that she said to me was, "You are to be my hands and voice upon the earth," because even though she has manifested here physically with me several, well, 13 times, um, she can't hold this physical manifestation for a long period of time, it seems. It seems like it can only happen in relation to a human being that she can connect with. And whatever her purpose is for being here, it seems to be that she wants to tell us that, this is not the end. We are not alone, even if there are difficult times that we've been through and that are still coming. Um, there are there are forces for good as well. I think one of the things that comes to me is Ingo Swan's book about the apparitions of Mary. And when he was speaking about the apparitions, one of the things that really struck me was how he said they often happen before a time of like great social change for humanity, such as when the apparitions of Lord happened in Fatima and everything else. And obviously, Chris's encounter, I think, is more in keeping with that particular type of encounter, whereas mine have been more personal in a way. And I think more about what I can do to be, I know this is going to sound weird, but be like her almost, and be able to spread some of that information and that energy out into the world in this time of hardship. I think she hasn't given me warnings for the future because probably it would make me anxious and worried. Instead, she's showing me, that we are eternal beings, and even if we have hardships to come, that is the reality. And there are positive beings here that do want to help us. And one thing that's coming to me is to say to you, in the history of the Languedoc region, Richard told me that the first knowledge of the lady came from the time of the Magdalenian period when we had the Ice Age, and they found a sculpture of a woman that looks just like the lady and how she's often seen, like a veiled woman. If you look at it, it looks a lot like a grey face of a grey, you could say. Um, and what I understood and what I have been told is that these beings in the past with our ancestors during these times of crisis would help the seers to lead the tribes to safety. And it could well be that, the messages that Chris is getting and that other people have got are to help us navigate difficult times and lead each other to safety. But for me personally, I haven't been given those informations that Chris has been given. No.
I have a quick question before we go back to you, Jay. Just Amanda, my question, because just hearing you talking about how you know the lady, is seen right before we go through some really rough times, and obviously if we've been alive in the past like 3 or 4 decades, it's just coming to. I mean, it's just horrifying right now. Even though it's been pretty bad all along. What, why do you, I mean, have you heard instances, would I like going back 60, 70 years, the Roswell incident was 47, Magenta was 19, the Magenta UFO crash was 1933 in Italy. Um, the Holocaust, World War II happened, in the early 40s. Is there anyone like Chris Bledsoe or yourself that you can think of that maybe you've heard about in your teachings or across your adventures that came forward during that time to talk about the lady?
That's a really interesting question. And one of the things that comes to me is in my Gnostic tradition, like I said, Jules Darnell and Lady Kate Ness, they were getting this information in around 1880. Another one of my lineage, a man called Eugene Vintras, was getting information about this new age of the divine feminine, and I think he died in 1875. So I do feel that there's been this kind of the seed that's been planted a long time ago, and it's still coming to fruition now. And it's really interesting what you say there about these different events, and it's almost as if the lady is here during these times to remind us. And I'm reminded also of a story that I did hear about soldiers during, I think it was the Second World War, who claimed to have seen the lady as well. And I've also heard of people who said that they saw her in Turkey during one of the recent earthquakes.
Oh, wow. I did not know that. I know that the World War II, they saw the Foo Fighters, which I believe were orange orbs in the sky, which a couple of us historical researchers are trying to nail it down to maybe the Nazis and their work on, the re-engineered tech programs that quite possibly happened based off of the 1933 crash. But that's for another day, and just something to toss around in there. Something that we're looking at. But yeah, interesting, very interesting. Go ahead, Jay. Just
Okay, so you spoke about orbs before. I'm wondering, were you given any idea about what these orbs were and their purpose was with, our Earth and ourselves?
Not directly, but my understanding of them from my esoteric tradition is that they've kind of always been here, and that seems to tie in with the research of Diana Pasulka as well. And I think from my own experience, the ones that I've encountered at least, and the people that I'm friends with have encountered, have been positive. I think that I can only speculate because I have no knowledge of this as fact, but I think given what I've understood from the aerospace engineer's testimony that I shared with Sarah, they do contain a quantum data which is transferred to us, but I think they also read us. They also interact with us. And from my own experiences, I feel like they've always been here. Like, I think they're part of the fabric of our reality. What they are, though, I don't know.
Jay, just did you have a follow up?
Um, the quantum, like they record us? Is that what you're saying? Or
It's very interesting that you should say that, because in the document that I shared with Sarah privately, yes, that's one of the things that the aerospace engineer said. Yes.
Do you think it's quite possibly to learn more about us or to document our history for future purposes?
Good question. It almost feels like they are part of us. Like, in my experiences, they're like a higher form of our consciousness.
Yes, it's interesting to me, especially when we're talking when Philip Corso Jr. talks about the fact that that the Roswell crash was them coming from the future. Uh, he specifically talks about that to give a so this is fascinating. When I was younger, I used to think of the UFO sightings as almost like school trips for future people. So instead of us watching a movie on World War II, you could get into a craft and come back and witness World War II, in this futuristic way, without actually affecting the timeline itself. It was just a strange thought process that I had had when I was younger.
Sarah, I love that. You should write that as a film script.
I'm not sure, yeah, where I would go with that, but that was always my thought, like, oh, this week we're going to go and watch, the Berlin Wall fall, and then all the students get into the craft, and then they go back and they watch the Berlin Wall fall, um, instead of watching a movie about it or reading about it in a book, you're actually like physically there, which would be fascinating.
It would be.
Go ahead, Jay, just.
Well, if we're all part of the same thing, like I always consider this, and we talk about this a lot in our space, like we're all part of the same thing. The universe is made up of the same thing, the same energy. So we're the universe experiencing itself. Um, is there any thoughts to that? Like, do you see that also in your practices and in what knowledge you've been given?
I do. And in that encounter that I had in 2013 where I was taken up, that was really what I came away with. I came away with that exact feeling.
And then I'm sure you're uh, familiar with Jack's AI uh, time travel phone call that he got when he was 13, and how he thinks that it was AI coming back. Where do you think that AI fits in all of this, you know, worldview, in the orbs, the lady, where we're going as a society? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think that for me, the technological aspect of this is something I've always stepped aside from because my focus on the lady and on the orbs has always felt, and also on my Black Madonna or Black Goddess experience, it's always felt more spiritual and interdimensional, and one could say cosmic, and about consciousness and about humanity as a whole. And the technological aspects I never really understood until very, very recently, and that was largely through speaking with Diana. Um, but one of the things that came to me is that when my dad was very young, speaking about the bloodlines again and the orbs, he told my grandmother when he was 3, so this is 1953, and he would lie on the grass and point at the sky and say, "When are they coming to take me home?" And he would say this repeatedly. And my grandmother would say, "Well, who?" And he would say, "The men in the ships." And he then said they come down and they teach me things. And before my dad passed away, I was able to speak about this with him. And he went on to make his fortune in ultrasonics engineering, and he was an inventor. And he told me, yeah, oh yeah, I remember this. When I was a little boy, I'd see them and they'd come down in their ships, the men in the ships. And I said, well, what happened? What did they do? And he said, oh, well, they'd teach me things, they'd show me things about history, things about the future, and things that I used in my inventions later on. And I was really happy that I got to have this conversation with him before he died, because it made me aware that he'd been contacted as well. And then he utilized what he was shown in his inventions. And I remember before I knew this, reading about Tesla and how Tesla said in his autobiography that he was also shown his inventions by angels, that would show him things and that he would see them as visions. And then when he would make them, according to what he would see, these inventions would be almost perfect. And so I do think that, the NHI are interacting with us in ways of technology. And I think the reason that they're doing that, at least partly, is to help us, because without the technology that we have now, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Many people would have lost their lives in all kinds of different ways. The technological advances that we've had in just the last 100 years have been outstanding, and who knows where it's going to lead.
That's very true. Or welcome to the stage. Did you have a question for Amanda?
I came in and I knew to come in, and right as I came in, I heard mention of the lady. So no accidents, but I don't think I have a question. But I don't know. I don't know why I'm here. Why are we here? What are we talking about?
Well, thank you. We've had a long 3 hour space, and I encourage you to go back and listen at some point later on. And Amanda does tell she's had 13 experiences with the lady, and she does,
Oh, my.
yeah. So please go back and listen. And if you have,
I'll just catch up with her in the back channels and listen to this all later on. But wonderful. Cheers. Nice. Wonderful. Wonderful.
thank you, or go ahead, Jay. Just
So I wanted to talk about psychic experiences because I've had many in my life, and I think it's a normal human attribute that we have. It's just most people ignore it or don't practice it and enhance their abilities. And I was wondering though, like, why is it some people have psychic experiences and then some people have out of body experiences and some people have like more spiritual experiences? It always perplexed me. Is it just like they needed that for growth? Do you have any thoughts on that?
That's a good question. What was it about it that perplexed you?
I just wonder why everyone has such different experiences. Like, um, my husband, for instance, I don't think he has a psychic bone. And he does. He probably does. He just uses it in a different way than I do. But like, he wouldn't acknowledge it. He thinks it's everything is crazy that I talk about. So, like, I'm wondering, do you feel there are certain people are special, or do you feel like humankind was given psychic abilities to survive, like for like we don't really recognize it as a species. We're starting to. Do you think we'll start to recognize it more as
Yeah,
innate?
I do. I do. There's a psychologist called Dr. Elaine Aron. Have you ever come across her?
Probably not.
No, she's written a book called The Highly Sensitive Person, and she discovered that 20% of humans are born highly sensitive, as she describes it. And when I did the research, when I was doing transpersonal psychology, I discovered it's pretty much the same when it comes to inborn psychic ability. So we are actually in the minority. And it was in that book that I first understood this concept of the seer or the advisor or the priest or priestess, helping the king, for example, to make the right decisions because they can see ahead or see more deeply into what's happening. It's an interesting book. It's worth a read. And then I found out from another book by another psychologist who'd studied people who'd had anomalous experiences, and he came to about the same percentage, 20%. So I would say that whether that's because we were destroyed, as Nick DeVere would say, deliberately, as with the genocide against the Cathars, and the witches and everything else, whether they tried to deliberately reduce people with psychic ability, because if we can see too much, we are threats to the people in power because we know what they're going to do, or whether or not it's just a natural phenomenon that there's only a small percentage at any given time. I do agree with you that many people have latent abilities that they don't develop, but I'd say it's only 20% who are born this way, from what I understand. And I'm thinking about the experiment with Persinger and the God helmet, and when he put it on the well-known atheist Richard Dawkins. Richard had absolutely no experience of God whatsoever, and it got me thinking, well, maybe people just have different nervous systems and different brains and different equipment. And Richard Dawkins didn't get God experience because he doesn't have that kind of a brain. So I think that it could well be that it's only a small percentage of people that have these abilities, because we also need people to do other things in our species. to protect the tribe, to make the food, to build the houses, create the infrastructure, manage the money. Just thinking about it in that way. But as far as I know, we are in the minority still.
Yeah, I saw like a really interesting talk with Daniel Brinkley, and he was like, everyone has purpose here. And even like from the person that you might assume would be the lowest of the low, like people would assume, to, the rock star that you idolize. So I just wanted to say that they've done studies on the brain, and a lot of people become psychic or extra sensitive after they've gone through trauma. And I wonder if it's certain people became more psychic as their ancestors were persecuted, and if persecution has something to do with developing these extrasensory abilities for the species to survive as well. And I think that's how mine developed. I'm pretty sure. And a lot of people, other people have these experiences as well I mean, I might have had some ability as a child. I remember looking at a flower and knowing it was healing and not understanding why, like a marigold, and not understanding why. And I would often play with like potions and make potions. And it was almost like I had that medicine person in me and understood that nature was healing. And I think that's natural in us as a species. Even animals use um, certain things in their environment to heal themselves. So, um, I think certain things develop for the species as well to survive.
That's really beautiful, and I agree.
I agree as well. Jajas, thank you so much for your questions. Um, I wanted to just say, Amanda, we've been going for 3 hours. How are you feeling? Are you good to wrap up the space?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, fantastic. Did you have any final words? Any last thoughts? Anything you want to put out there while we're here?
No, just thank you, Sarah, for holding this space and for asking such amazing questions, and your time, and for making this platform available to me to speak about this. It's been wonderful.
It's been absolutely wonderful having you. I want to thank Juan and Steve for introducing us, and they're always they're such wonderful people, and so I trust them immensely. And I also want to say that I look forward to our conversations off this platform. And I thank you for your bravery and your courage coming forward here today, because I know that being an experiencer and sharing your story and everything that you've been through is not easy. And so I very much, I thank you very much for your bravery for being here with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I also want to thank everyone that came up and asked questions. Jay, just of course, the questioner of all spaces. She's such a fascinating mind. You really do, and I thank you so much for that. And everyone being
Thanks,
here,
Sarah.
Fringe, Doomer, Urs, Interstellar, Blue, Ruby, Mac. I just Robert, V, Chris. Um, everyone for being here and sticking with us through the space. I really appreciate all of you. Amanda, where can people find you once you leave here?
They can find me on here on Facebook, Instagram, and I also have a website, which is just my name, amandamariamneradcliffe.com. Oh, yeah, that's it. Yeah, and I'm soon to set up a YouTube channel. I'm going to start speaking about my experiences and interviewing other experiences too.
Amazing. Thank you. Yes, well, we did it. It happened, and I'm so glad to be a part of that. And I wish you a wonderful night, because I know it's late for you. So I wish you a wonderful night, and I look forward to speaking to you in the future. And I hope everyone has a really great rest of your Sunday. Thank you all for being here, and have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll see you guys soon.